Broken Death Timer. Written by V the Trash King. Read by Arashi. Claude Riegan stared down a pair of twins, one dyed mint green with wild, silky hair and a small frame, and the other bland, copy-pasted blue hair, his eyes narrowed into a knife's edge. The woman with mint hair leaned forward in her leather chair, folding her dainty hands together, watching him back. The man took to hanging off the polished mahogany desk, briefly flitting his gaze to Claude, then to his female counterpart. The only splash of color the man wore was a ratty, old red scarf. Something pricked in the back of Claude's mind. Anxiety, like these two held his very fate in their hands, rumors of them being death's door itself for few and far between hitmen. He's heard, of course, and ignored them, but facing the pair of demons now gave him pause. Caution to believe those rumors weren't just talk. An agent, bred to be a child soldier, would walk into this room for a mission, the mockery of a principal's office, walk out, and never be seen again. Initially, it had seemed like one big stretch, but Claude's dear friend, Ruin, was ensnared by the twins and went missing in action and declared dead 5 months later. Before Ruin, it was Yuri. And Vestra. Before them, it was, "Hello, Failnaught," the woman greeted, an ever-so-soft smile tugging at her face. The man wrote down the same words without even emoting. They both looked straight at him, and for the first time in years, he felt deeply unsettled. Claude forced down his growing discomfort for an easy smile and promptly felt worse when the woman's smile dropped. "Have a mission for me?" Claude's eyes skittered past the folder, looking at the golden nameplate. "Byleth?" "Of course." The man, also Byleth, jerked his head into a nod and wrote down, "Check the folder." Claude's heeled boots clicked against the sleek black floor, a leather brown glove hand brushing at the folder. A picture of his new target stared back. Dimitri Alexandre Blaiddyd. The man in the photo smiled politely, if not a little awkwardly, gently holding a yowling kitten in his toned arms. A parakeet made his ratty golden hair its nest, nibbling on a strand. Papers upon papers of information peeked from the folder. Claude disregarded the picture entirely for one of the papers. A slow smile etched on his face as he read over a few. 23. Former MMA fighter and a war vet, Lost an eye. Works at an animal shelter. All of his family members are deceased, and he only has a small friend group. What? He has super strength due to experimentation. That's so. Looks like he'll be a challenge. Then again, he looks like the type to trust easy. Shouldn't be too hard to worm my way in like usual. Looks like a challenge. The twins just looked at each other, like they were holding a secret over Claude's head. Female Byleth was the first to glance away, pinning Claude with her gemstones for eyes. Her round, wide eyes seemed ancient, almost demanding him to bow before her without even a word. The air around her wasn't any more comforting. It felt crushing, forcing him to hold his breath. Time seemed to be at a standstill, despite dust catching in the low light and floating, despite the air conditioner blowing a frosty chill. "It might be your last mission." Claude refused to choke, to look affected, his smile straining at the edges. He knew questions would lead to a bullet in his brain, and the powerful energy swarming the twins stopped him from trying. Claude worked up the nerve to wink, and female Byleth looked minorly amused. "Don't worry, I'll be careful." "We're hardly worried. If you happen to fail." Female Byleth plucked the notepad from her twin's hands, gently sitting it down with a pointed look. Her male counterpart poked the page with a betrayed pout. Every person that came into contact with these two, that accepted the mission from them, were deemed a failure, and not a single person passed their mission and lived. This life was the only thing he really knew after being kicked to the curb from his birthplace, his pipe dream that he eventually gave up on. His charms and silver tongue was as perfect as his aim with a gun, and that was sadly about it. All he had was slipping poisons into drinks and food, clean headshots and slitting throats, leeching off of targets, lying in wait and befriending them, watching the realization and betrayal flooding their faces before offing them. "Nothing will happen to you, Master Tactician." Claude held back from making a face, his eyebrows quirking down at the slightest hint of distaste. Byleth easily saw through his smile, huffing out a quiet laugh. She gave back the notepad. Male Byleth hid his mouth with his scarf, bringing the deep red fabric to his nose. "If something does happen," Byleth pressed hard into the page, underlining the word "does." "Byleth can figure it out." Claude didn't want to know how Byleth would figure it out. Instead, he watched Byleth continue to write, a flicker of emotion passing in his cold blue eyes. The snow will melt, and when it does, don't bother to be prepared. Good luck, and fail successfully. Thanks for the reassurance and well wishes. Claude did a lazy two-fingered salute, plastering on a smile he didn't feel. I'll be off. Male Byleth merely waved with a weird smile, as if he was a toddler trying out how to emote. Female Byleth did a salute back with a sharp gusto, the look in her eyes shifting into something painfully soft and full of pride. Claude didn't understand it, didn't want to understand it, so he opted for a strategic retreat. Claude turned on his heel, slinking out the door, his footsteps barely making a sound. After some internal deliberation, Claude concluded the best route to be moving into an apartment a block away from his target. The only bona fide, a self-confident idiot, would choose to live in the exact same building. Whether it was Claude's paranoia or experience, he wasn't sure, but he made nice with the landlord, Judith, and found himself a temporary place to stay. It was small, the walls off-colored and cracking in some places, the plumbing an absolute trash fire, but Judith made it ever so worth it by buying a gift basket. Claude stared at himself in the bedroom mirror, allowing a wry smirk to grace his face. He ruffled his hair some, making it far messier than usual, the curls more pronounced as a result. Outfitted in a mustard yellow hoodie, washed-out blue jeans, and basic white socks, he was ready to brave the spring chill. As for meeting his target today, he already hid discreet, cheap pencil knives and switchblades in his bag. A gun and a row of glass vials would be far too suspicious, after all. He eyed his brown leather sling bag before grabbing it. His burner phone buzzed inside his bag, and Claude ignored it. He walked out of his bedroom, his lip curling as the floorboards creaked in agony. Triple-checking for his keys and wallet, Claude headed out. With a short walk down 5 flights of stairs and fumbling with the lobby's double doors, Claude was greeted with the foggy, late morning, people milling about and casually jaywalking, a line of cars slowly going by. Claude felt a sense of freedom in his blood, watching the chaos of the city block. It was the sort of freedom that birds with clipped wings could enjoy, boxed into a certain set of areas, awaiting to flee in another cage. But it felt nice. And it'll feel even nicer when I see just what kind of person my target is. Claude unzipped his bag and fished out his phone. He opened the map app, inputting the address for the animal shelter. It wasn't exactly far, and it was definitely within walking distance. Taking a bus would be a decent idea, though he didn't want any bystanders sniffing him out, let alone police. Walking down 15 blocks it is. Claude's head was swarming with thoughts as he walked, and he itched to smile something giddy. He hungered to know the ins and outs of his future victim, what made him tick, what expressions he'd have on his face when Claude greets him with a gun to his head, if it would be easy to befriend him, how to befriend him. He wasn't the seducing sort. He could play up his charm and flash a grin, but he wasn't about kissing, cheap lines, or anything like that. Maybe he could give it a shot and see what happens. Or maybe he could just use the guy instead. Spin fakery tales, or hell, even a sob story to lure him. In. Get his target to do whatever he wanted. And he could see to his theories, his plans right this second, staring at the glass double doors of the animal shelter. Posters, deals, and other papers were posted onto the doors, a colorful splotch of door stickers slapped on the glass. Claude glanced up, his eyes roving over the large, dark blue letters affixed to the white snow exterior brick walls. New Fargus Animal Shelter. Claude pushed open the door, a bell jingling above. Smooth blue tiles with black, white dots and warm off-white walls speckled with animal pictures and thank-you notes from adopters greeted him. So did the yipping, barking mules and incessant chirping. It was an assault to Claude's ears, and even though he had a tiny soft spot for animals, he really didn't think he could take a minute of this. His nostrils promptly flared at the thought. He wasn't weak. The howls and probably happy cries of animals wouldn't stop him. He'd adapt, and he had to. Letting his target slip from his fingers because of noises was laughable. So, he smoothed out his smile, crinkling his eyes as he was ready to stake out and adopt a pet. He noticed the woman by the front desk perk up, looking at him with a pleasant smile. Claude bided a bit of time, pretending to look around before approaching her. Equally pleasant blue eyes met his, pale and short, milk latte hair framing her face. "Good morning. Are you looking to adopt?" the woman chirped. "Hey." Claude's eyes flit to her name tag. "Mercedes. And no thank you. My job's too grueling for a pet." Mercedes didn't look hurt, but a sad little frown chased away her smile. "Oh, that's too bad. Well, is there anything else I can do for you?" Claude grinned. "As a matter of fact, yes you can. Is there anyone I can speak to about the adoption process? Just in case I need a break from work, you know? Claude beat down his sly grin, a tingling sensation swarming his fingers and colliding around his arms. He knew he shouldn't feel this excited, so giddy over something so small, but he always felt relieved, happy almost at his plans working out. The steps of his plans proceeding without a hitch or a mistake. That feeling only exploded in his heart once Mercedes' eyes went a bit wider with recollection. Her frown easily slipped away with another sweet smile. She clasped her hands together, entirely delighted. Take a right and go down the back and you'll find him. Dimitri can be a little... Another frowned, her lips twisting into something wistful, empathetic. Quiet, but he can surely help. What a vote of confidence. Dimitri's that great? Mercedes laughed, hiding a hand over her mouth. Of course. We're all friends after all. Claude allowed for the surprise to flicker on his face. He would obviously have friends, whether it was small and close-knit or massive and nearly unruly. It was on his file, but Claude hated the feeling of his heart taking a sharp dip. He hadn't thought of remorse, of any sort of guilt since the weight of his profession sunk in, the amount of bodies slowly surrounding him. Feeling anything close to that would kill him. So he pushed those emotions far back into his head, twisted and tore them until he could only register the burn of his fingers after strangling someone, the fresh blood hitting his clothes. And yet, that optimistic, weakening Khalid would sneak up on him, tugging at his blood-stained sleeve to remind Failnaught that his ghost was still here. Small world, I guess. Anyways, it was great talking to you. See you around. It was the worst attempt to walk from a conversation, but Claude couldn't take another second of that sunshine-bright smile, the flash of pride and happiness in her eyes when she mentioned Dimitri. He fought off a wince at Mercedes' cheerful, "Goodbye, have a nice day." Claude followed her directions, quietly walking left and down the hall, his lips twitching at the lizards and squawking birds in their cages. Then Claude saw him. For all the information gleaned on him, for how tall the guy really was, Dimitri Alexandre Blaiddyd looked so unassuming with his uniform, a midnight blue polo shirt topped off with black slacks, a flock of different birds hanging off of him, the smile on his pale face, unbidden and painfully genuine. A parakeet kissed at his blonde hair, nibbling at a strand. Another sat pretty right on his head, chirping and bobbing its head. A cockatoo in rough shape, feathers plucked out, screeched right in his ear, and the man merely laughed, gently weaving a black-gloved hand into the bird's feathers and petting it. A twin set of parrotlets climbed up his shirt. The cockatoo became increasingly intrigued by Dimitri's eye patch, watching the black strap and poking its beak into his cheek, cooing and softly trilling, the feathers on its head raised, exposing the pale pink beneath, its head cocking and slowly looking Claude over. Dimitri's hand tensed, his shoulders locking in place, but he controlled his movements and gently turned his head. Damn, that was quick. Dimitri's smile dropped, giving Claude a once-over like he knew whatever he saw was dangerous. But his hackles promptly lowered, and an apologetic look soon swept his face. He fully turned to face him, the bird on his head shrieking in minor outrage, pecking at his hair. My apologies. I just thought... Dimitri cleared his throat, smiling politely at him. Never mind that. Do you need something? Claude knew he only got a snapshot of what Dimitri was like. That there was more to him than just that tension in Dimitri's shoulders Claude spotted was proof enough, just how fast he could sense danger. But he also remembered someone telling him, animals, without a doubt, can sniff out and despise terrible people. Claude knew what he saw. He knew just what kind of person Dimitri was, and the hole in his heart grew some. Dimitri was a guy with a terribly soft heart, scarred as it probably was. Claude didn't think it would ever take a dip in cold-blooded cynicism. Though, if he was betrayed by a soon-to-be close friend, then maybe it would happen. And since this was Claude's last mission, well, he guessed he'd burn with him. Nothing, but do you mind if I stick around? Just like the birds clinging onto him, Dimitri tilted his head a bit, looking a little lost. 4? Dimitri's brows scrunched over, and the cockatoo lightly bumped into Dimitri's forehead. The birds? Claude snorted, a smirk pulling at his lips. Well, they are my second favorite animal. He winked, instantly puffing with pride at the pink staining Dimitri's cheeks. But I was hoping I could stick around for you. Dimitri stood a little straighter, his eye widening. The blush traveled to the rest of his face, and with a little amusement, Claude watched the cockatoo fan out its feathers and glare at him. Demonic warbling left its black beak, and then a shrill, angry-sounding screech. Whether the bird was on high alert or attention-hungry, Claude had no idea. But the embarrassed look on Dimitri's face was sweet, giving Claude a full out to play with his heart and crush it under his boot. Dimitri averted his crystal blue gaze, twisting his lips into a crooked frown. Truthfully, I am not all that interesting. Which, to Claude, was a blatant lie, but judging by Dimitri's own body language, it was not. But if you wish to be around me, I can allow that. Just, pretend to work, maybe? Dimitri narrowed his eye, sucking in his bottom lip. Although, I don't think Mercedes would mind all that much. Claude grinned, full of teeth. So what you're saying is, slack off and talk your ears off? Dimitri huffed a laugh through his nose, his lips twitching into a faint smile. It baffled Claude that even that smile was real. Is that what you do usually when you're working? Claude shrugged and carelessly waved his hand. I wish. Office work is very cutthroat, or at least my building it is. Really is a pain in the neck sometimes. Dimitri nodded, and Claude wholeheartedly wished his target's kindness had to be an act. Something. He looked so empathetic, just with that simple lie placed into the spotlight. Truly, they do not overwork you, do they? Though, if the environment is like that... Dimitri sighed. Never mind. Pace yourself if you can. Patch that heart up of yours, big guy. You don't want to run out of blood, do you? Please, it's nothing. But go on. Talk away. If you insist. Claude chirped with a closed-mouthed smile. Tell me more about the baby raging on your shoulder. The cockatoo, I mean. Dimitri sputtered out a rich laugh. And if Claude was a weak, soft-hearted man, he would have crumbled to dust. The blonde's eyes narrowed and crinkled at the corners, pure delight dancing in it. Don't mind Cyrus. He's a sweet boy. Your sweet boy has been glaring at me for the past, 2 minutes? Dimitri stifled another laugh, a wobbly smile threatening to reach his face. He is usually a sweet bird. Dimitri's joy crumpled somewhat. When we got him, he was anything but. Cyrus came to us in a terrible shape a few years ago. He was malnourished and mistreated by his... Dimitri's lip curled, the first flash of anger. Owners. Due to stress, he must have plucked out his own feathers. He didn't take well to anyone at first, even me. I nearly lost a finger to his beak. But that was my fault. To be honest, I was in a similar position as Cyrus, so I connected with him. He was terrified of this new place, angry and hurt. So I wished to soothe him in some way. Dimitri awkwardly laughed. So I came to work on my days off, just to spend time with him. Dimitri glanced at the cockatoo on his shoulder, smiling away. I suppose that's why he's so protective over me. He lowered his voice into something gentle, distracting his attention to Cyrus. Aren't you? Don't fret, Cyrus. I'll be just fine. Cyrus bobbled his head, snuggling into Dimitri's neck, making him laugh again. Claude whistled, aiming to tease instead of prod. All right, Mr. Savior King. Seriously, though, that's impressive. Dimitri waved off the praise with a light smile, though a blush still raged on his face. I merely did what I thought was right, that's all. Claude hummed, bobbing his head. Sure, but not many people would actually do that. Speaking of lost and confused animals, I moved here a week ago, so I'm super new to town. Oh, is that so? I'm available this Saturday, so if you like, I can show you around. Claude's smile shifted, part ruthlessly giddy and genuinely intrigued. He smirked, lowering his eyelids and raising an eyebrow. Available, Claude asked, deepening his voice to something suggestive. He'd never go to that dirty flirt angle again, but it was so worth seeing Dimitri sputter, that pink flush burning bright red. No, not like that. What did you think I mean? Dimitri sent Claude a bashful glare. Easy, easy, I was kidding. But sure, yeah, I'd love to hang out with you this Saturday, Dimitri. Dimitri startled, his posture going a bit tense around the sound of his name. Then he brushed a free hand along his name tag, relaxing a bit. Those instincts of his must be going wild. It's a really good thing I caught him at his job so he would brush stuff like this off. Wonderful, Dimitri stopped himself short, clearly fishing for a name. Claude. Here. Claude pulled out his phone, showing Dimitri his number. Text me when Cyrus stops demanding your attention. See you on Saturday. Claude, Dimitri called like he was testing out the name on his lips. I'll see you then. Claude hid away a smile when Cyrus crowed and jeered, shrieking to high hell that the evil was finally retreating. He turned on his heel and left the animal shelter. Claude lazed on his bed, curled up on his side. His eyes flicked to his cherry-brown nightstand, his phone buzzing. He flopped over and swiped his phone with an eager smile. Claude unlocked it, checking his messages. Unknown number. 437. Good afternoon. This is Dimitri. Claude R. 437. Ayo, what's up? Claude went through his settings and set Dimitri's contact as Mr. Savior King. Mr. Savior King. I was not expecting that texting style. Mr. Savior King. I am doing well, though. Thank you for asking. I just got home. Claude R. So formal, Your Highness. Claude R. Break the law and gasp. Don't type with full punctuation. Mr. Savior King. How was your day? Claude R. How cruel. You ignored me. Claude R. Thought we had something. I'm gonna go cry a whole ocean. Claude R. I'll get you to break the law one day, but my day was alright. Nothing too special. Mr. Savior King. LOL. Claude R. That sounds so fucking deadpan. Mr. Savior King. My apologies. I'm glad your day went well. Claude R. I got to meet you, so it went a little more than well. Mr. Savior King. Oh, Mr. Savior King. I see. Thank you. Claude R. I'm sensing a disturbance of some kind. Was that too much? Claude R. If so, I'm sorry. Mr. Savior King. No. You just caught me off guard, that's all. Claude R. So, blushing like a maiden, or the oh shit off guard? Mr. Savior King. Claude. Claude R. I'll take blushing like a maiden for 500. Mr. Savior King. Claude! Mr. Savior King. I can see you're going to adore getting under my skin, aren't you? Claude R. Not gonna lie, you make it real easy. Claude R. And honestly, I'm all here for it. Mr. Savior King. I will have my vengeance. Claude R. Oh, you sweet summer child. Claude R. Do tell me about yourself, Your Majesty. Claude R. For all I know, I'm meeting an axe murderer on Sat. Mr. Savior King. Only if you tell me about yourself as well. Mr. Savior King. Unless that is too forward of me. Claude R. Nah, you good, lol. Claude R. 20 questions agreeable? Mr. Savior King. Yes, thank you. Claude R. Let's see. Favorite color, lol? Mr. Savior King. Blue is a lovely color. Yours? Claude R. Gotta say, yellow is a close fave. Not puke yellow. That shit is nasty. Mr. Savior King. Duly noted. Mr. Savior King. This is a bit random, but pineapple on pizza? Claude R. Hard no. What kind of savage eats that? In reality, he hardly cared about that debate. He just really wanted to see what Dimitri would say. Mr. Savior King. Me? Mr. Savior King. The hate around it is rather silly to me, and I don't mind the taste of pineapple pizza either. Claude R. Wow, honestly, a fan of fruit pizza is way worse than an axe murderer. Claude R. Why don't you mind it, though? Or is that bad news territory? Mr. Savior King. A little bit, yes. Mr. Savior King. The cheese makes it better, though. Claude R. What are you, a mouse? Mr. Savior King. Squeak, squeak. Mr. Savior King. And no, I do like anything with cheese, however. Claude R. All you're doing is incriminating yourself, I hope you know that. Mr. Savior King. I will stand by what I said. I am not a mouse, LOL. Claude R. Lol. Claude R. Anyways, your mouseliness. You up for texting some more? Dimitri agreed, and Claude watched the time go by on his phone. Dimitri started to open up a little more, still keeping his formal texting style as he recounted playing in the snow with his childhood friends, how he had a vague rough spot in his life, the wariness in his tone when he mentioned his anger issues, like he was afraid of judgment. He largely spoke more about his friends than he did himself, so Claude learned a bit about Mercedes and her penchant for sewing, Annette's baking, Ash's hidden restaurant and his knack for archery, the look on Dudu's face when he ate something he liked, how cat-like his best friend Felix was, how much of a mother-hen babysitter Ingrid would be, how he reunited with another childhood friend. Claude made sure to tell him some things to make it nice and even, none of them true except for, I don't feel safe without a switchblade on me. The truth wasn't even retched out of him, demanded or beaten out of his mouth. Something about Dimitri made it easy to put a dent in his jaded, iron-walled heart. The man did jack shit to him, no threats or violence. He just talked and got himself an earnest answer. And that was absolutely terrifying. Claude knew that eventually all his secrets would be laying before Dimitri's feet. He just hoped he'd kill him before then. Claude woke up to the morning sun peeking through his window, light spilling into his room and shifting to slits due to the blinds. He rolled out of bed and ignored his phone laying plugged in by the floor. Trudging over to his bathroom, Claude watched himself faintly smile in the mirror, his eyes quickly swooping to his folding razor blade. He got himself ready, brushing his teeth, washing his face, the like. Claude grabbed the weapon, taking it to his bedroom and dropping it onto his bed. With a yawn, he rummaged through his dresser, not really caring about what he wore. He pulled out a plain white dress shirt. The gold buttons, at least, were moderately fancy. Ripped dark blue jeans, black socks, and called it a day. Claude knew, for all his quick draw with a gun and clean executions, he was still a person with weaknesses. Namely, the cold. Even the slightest chill would bother him if he didn't wear enough layers. He never announced to anyone if he was figuratively freezing to death from a modicum of icy winds or the air, always keeping a smile with colder eyes and politely ignoring the shivers going through his body. Though, exploiting his own weaknesses for his target, he could do that. Will do. Dimitri's heart constantly bled, and who could Claude be not to take advantage of that? Claude put his arm through his sleeve, then the other, feeling rather pleased at the contrast of his dark yellow tank top and the shirt. He buttoned the shirt up, grabbing his razor and folding it. Claude tucked the weapon in his sleeve, sliding off his shorts to trade for his jeans. He slid on his socks, picking up his phone and bag, heading into the living room. Claude stepped into his bright yellow slip-ons, falling into his couch and checking his phone after it buzzed in his hand. Savior King. 9:19.
Good morning, Claude.
Savior King.
Please, let me know when you're ready.
Savior King. Smiley face.
Claude R.
Ready as ever.
Claude R.
You said you'd pick me up from my house, yeah?
Savior King. Of course. I shall be on my way.
Savior King.
Be sure to bundle up. It'll be cold today.
Claude R. Nah, I'll be good. About 5-6 minutes later, Dimitri sent off another text message. Claude shoved his phone into his bag and left his apartment. Claude found Dimitri standing right outside the building, the man starting to pull out his phone. His brow pinched, his eyes slightly narrowing. He looked a little worried, so Claude decided to stop that. Hey! Dimitri looked back, a soft smile slowly crawling up his face. He looked prepared for the weather, or, really, he just liked covering up, as he wore a black turtleneck, slim gray slacks, and pitch-black combat boots. He briefly fiddled with the sleeves of his dark blue overcoat, wearing the exact same gloves as before. The guy was put together with his wild hair tied in a short ponytail, though faint eye bags shadowed his eye.
Claude, good morning.
Claude strolled right up to him, giving a lazy wave of his hand. Mornin'. Bad night? Dimitri's eyebrows picked up, his crystal blue eye widening. He quickly averted his eye, his shoulders slightly slumping. The blonde nodded, clearly sheepish. Dimitri pocketed his phone, starting to walk and lead the way to wherever they were going. Claude followed, walking in step with him.
I misplaced my sleep medication, so I couldn't sleep much. I apologize if I seem a little...
Dimitri made a face, almost wincing.
Quiet? Upset?
Nah, don't apologize for that. If anything, I should be saying sorry for dragging you out here so early.
Please, I don't mind at all.
Claude smirked. So polite, Your Highness. Anyways, what's the first stop? Dimitri curled his hand into a loose fist, bringing it to his chin. He looked off into the sidewalk, staring at the sparse amount of trees as they walked by.
Well, what do you like to do?
Hobbies? Claude dragged the word out, debating if he should even lie. I read in my free time. Aside from that, Claude then settled with a half-truth. Archery ranges are my second favorite spots. It was definitely true. Claude took to reading like a fish in water, always curious about everything he read when he was younger. Reading off of nutrition facts on food, spending weeks upon weeks absorbing the words in a Fodlin dictionary. Even when he thought his dreams were in reach, he read on dozens of accounts for civil rights, each movement, each person, group, leader, and thought. I want to be like that. I want a future that's better for people like me, people who aren't like me. And then, life starkly beat him down and screamed no. So Claude got less of a new hobby and more of a training regimen. Along with the other kids, he was carted off to a closed-off shooting range, all reinforced sleek black walls, polished floors with gray-white scuff marks, rows of thick cardboard cutouts, their vital areas marked with black ink. He still remembered the weight of the pistol in his hands, the recoil shaking through his arms. He remembered thinking, oh, it's just like archery, and promptly having that innocent thought crushed to dust with his first hit. Claude was ripped from his memories when Dimitri visibly brightened. An archery range? There's one downtown. As for the library, it isn't too far from where you live, so if you want, we can go. Uh-huh. Thanks. I'll be sure to check the range out. You said Ash goes there, right? Yes, he does. Perhaps you could offer him a challenge. Claude raised his eyebrow, somewhat intrigued. He that good? Dimitri huffed out a breath, wanting to laugh as he beat it down and covered his mouth. With years of practice, I would say yes, though I think Ash is just bored. Or maybe it is a different matter entirely. Who knows? Either way, if push comes to shove, I'll show him what I've got. Claude held out his hands, shrugging with a smile. But for now, what are you doing? Dimitri was caught red-handed, and he laughed a little, faint pink dusting his cheeks. He slipped an arm out of his coat and eventually took it off, folding it over his arm. Dimitri twisted his lip, hesitantly holding out his coat. You look cold. Take it. Claude made sure to school the shock, only offering a sharper smile. You give everyone that Prince Charming treatment? Dimitri's silence was driven away with an offended look. With his eye bags and lips set in a frown, that mild offense seemed more like a glower. You make it sound like common decency is some sort of act. It is not, Dimitri replied, his voice rolling out in exasperation. Oh, I see. Claude knew pushing Dimitri's buttons when he was already feeling bad was not the greatest idea. But you don't like having your morals questioned? Dimitri's patience slipped for just a moment, that worrisome strength coming to play when the sideway cracked under his feet. His brow gave a slight pitch, his face contorting into a more intense glare, looking like he could and would stab the Grim Reaper with his own scythe. Then he caught himself, his explanation trying and failing to go blank, casting an apologetic look to Claude like Dimitri himself was at fault. Dimitri pinched the bridge of his nose with a drawn-out, tired sigh. Apologies. The casual air between them grew tense and unsure, that silence mainly coming off of Dimitri in waves. It was a calculated misstep, a tactic Claude would carry out to further peel off the mask his target wore, to see just how volatile their anger may get. Apparently, Dimitri's anger was only sort of kept under wraps, in the sense that it wasn't messy, just extremely obvious he was ticked off. It was silent, much like some of Claude's previous hits, a lot of them stewing in either prickly annoyance or genuine rage at even the smallest yet charged comment. Though it was rare of them to own up to their own heated reactions, to look frustrated or even embarrassed at themselves, to apologize to Claude's face and take the blame. Usually, or all the time, Claude's hits would use their anger as a weapon, that or fly into a rage and try to kill him. Because of Dimitri's stupid, genuine honesty, the words trapped and crushed in Claude's throat were let go. Again, it's not you who should be apologizing. I'm not the kind of guy to trust so easily. I'm not really good at accepting gifts or favors either. Claude had to stop himself from saying anything more. Why would you say that? I can't actually be this stupid. How did he... is that what it is? I understand. I've been told I'm rather too trusting or soft-hearted. Which is very true, by the way, Claude snipped, giving Dimitri a light-hearted side-eye. Dimitri gave him the barest hint of a smile, seeming a bit relieved. But I often struggle to tell my friends about myself, how bad my day truly went. He gave a slight tell, rubbing a gloved thumb against the back of his hand, wordlessly gesturing to his eye patch before lowering his head. Things like that. I've gotten better with it, though fear still plagues me whenever I voice my troubles. Claude hummed. Things like that. He's transparent like a mirror, but the glass is all fogged up. How come? Claude asked, internally surprising himself. Dimitri scratched at his cheek despite wearing a glove. He looked away again, this time not returning his gaze back at Claude. Well, at the time, I wanted to maintain my image. I just did not want anyone to find out, to worry for me. But
Also, Dimitri shook his head, stopping himself. I don't want to impose on you.
Still having issues opening up,
Dimitri immediately sent him a deadpan look. His pout looked closer to the deathly annoyed frown, and with his arm compromised by a coat, he wildly gestured with only one hand. No, Claude, that is different. Dimitri waved out an arm, his voice going a little light-hearted without getting loud, as his frown actually did turn back into a glare when Claude rose an eyebrow. Do not look at me like that. This is more of a, I cannot impose my feelings on a person I've just met. It's rude. Claude had to stop himself from laughing. He only smirked, half bemused and still a little caught off guard by Dimitri's raw honesty flaring up again.
You'd be surprised. I realized I became a sponge for people to complain. I have no idea, but to them I'm a good listener.
Dimitri had a funny look on his face, a half-smile, half-smirk, raising an eyebrow at Claude. It wasn't that he didn't believe Claude, more that he had something to say, but held it back.
Hey, don't clam up on my account. I just want to hear what you have to say.
Claude was probably going to burn a whole lot faster if he kept this up. Genuine intrigue? Genuine anything from him. He was slipping. He was slipping so fast and so early. Claude had better control over his words, knew how to use them, to hurt people, and it was going down the drain by someone he knew for about 2-3 days total. Dimitri held in a snicker, but humor still warmed his eye anyway.
What you are, I'm finding, is a menace.
Claude blinked, forcing down an actual smile. Never in his life had he heard the word menace be used so lightly, in friendly exasperation. It was always cruel, back home filled with foul anger and jeers, always thrown at him because everything about him was wrong, horrific. And when he moved to Fodland, it wasn't any better. Sure, nothing was said to his face, and little suspected the half-breed amongst the natives, but words were still set in the dark, generalized and flip-flopping on the subtle yet loud digs or plain ignorance.
It's the cold. It's getting to me,
Claude joked. Somehow, the joke flew right over Dimitri's head, and the blood jerked to a stop. He whipped his head to Claude, worry overriding his features. Dimitri unfolded the coat and immediately draped it over Claude's shoulders. For Dimitri's sake, Claude decided not to mention he was joking. The blonde looked a bit happy at his own Samaritan work, his eye crinkling as he muttered a soft, "Good." Dimitri's coat was warm, though. Very warm.
Thanks.
Dimitri smiled, all bright like the sun. It is no problem. Dimitri's smile dropped into something thoughtful. Have you eaten yet? We can stop by a cafe. It's a block away, actually.
I ate last night.
We are getting food. What do you like? Dimitri picked up his pace, striding across the sidewalk faster. Claude snorted, highly amused by the blonde's concern, but he followed along. It looks like he's ready to shred the block with each step. What a guy. The sharp look on Dimitri's face heavily suggested silence or dismissal wouldn't work out too well.
A burrito bowl is fine.
Dimitri curtly nodded, tacking on a thank you, since Dimitri was either a lightning-fast walker or worried enough. The pair made their way to the cafe in record time. Dimitri held the door open for him, because of course he would, and they walked inside. The cafe was like any other, snacks upon snacks packed into sections on a speckled brown countertop, freezers filled with water, juice, or iced coffee, the scent of hot drinks, and food exploding all around him. Brown booth seats lined the walls of the front of the cafe. Dimitri went up to order, and Claude trailed behind him. The cashier looked dead on his feet, dark brown eyes drooping, his eyebrows worse than Dimitri's. He gave Dimitri a light smile that grew warmer once the guy got a read on Dimitri's general demeanor.
Good morning. What would you like to order?
Claude stepped up to the plate, blandly smiling.
A chicken and beef burrito bowl and water.
The cashier didn't look too ruffled by Claude's insincere smile, probably used to seeing that on the daily.
Got it, fam? You can take a water from over there.
The cashier lazily slid his gaze over to Dimitri like he was half committed to his job.
And you?
Ah, yes, thank you. May I have an omelette with cheese and 2 pancakes?
The breakfast platter? All right, the boy corrected himself. Anything to drink?
Dimitri nodded. Chamomile tea, please. The cashier gave them the price while Claude went off to take a bottle of water. Dimitri paid for the both of them, because of course he did, thanking the cashier with an earnest smile. They didn't wait for too long, and soon found a seat farthest from the door. Claude briefly eyed Dimitri's tea, saying nothing, but a soft pang went off in his chest. He squashed it down for something more invasive.
No sugar?
Claude asked, watching Dimitri take a sip. Dimitri minutely flinched at the near-boiling hot drink, gently placing it down. He took to eating instead, another quirk of his flaring up and pushed to the wayside almost immediately. His elbows were set on the table and quickly removed, his image prim and proper once again. It was such a slight action, a mistake even. Most people would write it off, think nothing of it, but it left Claude wondering. Dimitri shook his head. I drink this to sleep, so I don't mind it being plain. It rang true as Dimitri kept his eye contact, though he looked a bit embarrassed to admit it, promptly glancing at his food a moment later. Claude filed the information, awaiting his next time to dig. He scooped a spoonful of rice, black beans, and beef, taking a bite. If it makes it easier, you can add milk. I'm a fan of chamomile tea, too. Dimitri's eye lit up, a soft smile reaching his face. I do not know why I haven't tried that yet. Thank you. Claude waved off Dimitri's reply with a roll of his eyes. It's no big deal. Claude dragged the word out. But I hope it works. I as well. Is the food all right? Oh, yeah. It's pretty good. So thanks for force-feeding me. Dimitri sputtered, going pink. I did not force-feed you. I merely... Claude huffed out a laugh through his nose, raising an eyebrow. Merely dragged me to a cafe to get me to eat? Dimitri looked like a kid caught stealing a cookie, all wide-eyed and rosy-cheeked. Don't worry, I'm only teasing. Is there anything else you'd like to show me? Dimitri thought on it, digging into his eggs. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's a mixed martial arts gym close by. Ooh, sounds exciting. You're a fighter, or do you just like punching people? Dimitri gave him another deadpan, painfully done look. No, I do not like punching people. Dimitri's gaze turned a little pained. I was an MMA fighter, however. Was? What happened? Dimitri sighed. I've mentioned being in a rough spot. I've trained for it ever since I turned 14, signed up for amateur matches. I had to quit, unfortunately, when I hit 17 and, fought in a war. After that, I re-entered the fighting scene for just under a year or two. Dimitri grimaced. It was a terrible decision. I was too angry, I suppose. Hurt. So I retired. Then you wound up as Cyrus's babysitter? Dimitri ate a piece of his pancake, smiling around the plastic fork. Yes, I prefer being Cyrus's caretaker than anything else. Then why don't you just adopt him if you like him so much? I want Cyrus to live comfortably, but I feel as though my apartment is unfit. The rooms aren't small by any means, but he might feel cramped. Claude hummed. I can be the judge of that. That is, if you allow me a house tour. Today? Dimitri whisper-yelled, clearly shocked. Claude thought he'd get a hard no, but the blonde started to quietly fret and said, Oh no, I haven't cleaned, and I have yet to stock up on groceries. I can only make simple dishes, but they are... Whoa, not now. I thought you'd save the whole house visitation for, 2 months from now? Dimitri flushed red. I may have miscalculated, though with Cyrus, my friends have been making the same arguments as you are. Claude snorted. I mean, of course they are. The bird loves you. And they've all seen your apartment, unlike me, and probably think, yeah, all right, this is suitable. Dimitri sunk into his chair. They have. But I worry, what if something happens to me? Or if Cyrus gets lonely while I'm at work? What if something happens? Something will. And it's almost a shame, really. Dimitri seems like a decent enough guy. I get you. Claude paused, eating some more. If it were me, I'd wait for a while until the dust settles. But life really doesn't work like that, so I don't know. It is true. I suppose I shall see. After some idle chatter and smooth shifts of conversation topics, they finished their meals. Dimitri cleaned up the table before leaving, Claude sending a light-hearted jab his way. The cold morning air got chillier, the afternoon sun pinned to the bright blue sky. Dimitri took the leading the way once again, walking off the food. He showed Claude around as promised, stopping in front of the library, even Ash's restaurant, a look of pride on his face. He slowed his pace when they rounded the corner of an MMA gym, time speeding by. Claude found himself at a park, walking side by side with a quiet Dimitri, watching the sun's light spill through the trees. It was strange, the feeling of peace settling in his heart. The twittering birds and the line of trees and field of grass encasing a long strip of river stopped looking so distant, so trivial. Say, do you think we could make this a weekly thing? I've had a lot of fun. For the first time in years, Claude was left stunned into a positive, warm silence. All it took was watching Dimitri's lips curl into an overjoyed, open-mouthed grin, his crystal blue eye alight. The sun's rays caught up to Dimitri, making the blonde look absolutely lethal. Of course, I'd love to. A month rolled by, and Claude was eventually invited to Dimitri's apartment. Dimitri checked through every bell and whistle the other day, rushing to clean every corner of his house. Today, on a fairly hot morning, Claude stood in the surprisingly well-kept lobby, waiting. The off-white, pale red flooring was a little dusty, lined with a thin crimson-red carpet. Mailboxes were sectioned off in 2 rows, commemorative photos and old newspapers placed on polished wooden plaques. Despite the walls being a basic cream white, the top of the multicolored tiles near the floor made it look warmer. 4 shining silver elevators were a little up ahead, 2 on each side of the narrowed wall. Claude leaned against the wall, pulling out his phone. Claude R. 11:25. Good morning. I'm in the lobby. Mr. Savior King. Exclamation mark. Mr. Savior King. That was fast. Then again, you do live a block away. Claude R. Wanna come down, or should I get lost trying to find my way to your apartment? Mr. Savior King. Claude, you aren't going to get lost. Mr. Savior King. I shall be down shortly. See you. After about 2 minutes, Claude heard the rough pitter-patter of footsteps echo against the staircase. Dimitri emerged from the rear end of the lobby, looking around before spotting Claude. He smiled brightly, pulling his hair out of his face. His bangs slipped back to where it were, and the blonde huffed. Dimitri's current attire somehow managed to shock Claude, his usual stuffy clothing nowhere to be seen. His jet-black tank top, blue camo sweatpants, and white flip-flops made him look softer. Sadly, he still wore gloves, clearly not all that comfortable. You look good, Dimitri. Dimitri flushed a bright pink, his ears turning red. Claude gave him a smug smirk in return, snickering to himself. Thank you. You too. Dimitri wordlessly headed over to the elevators, pressing the up button. The button lit up, and the pair were left waiting. Dimitri turned to Claude, tilting his head a bit. Have you eaten yet? Nope. Claude popped the pea, quietly laughing as Dimitri cast him an exasperated look. Hey, don't give me that look. I'm not eating as part of my 20-point plan. Dimitri snorted, shaking his head and smiling almost fondly. And what is your 20-point plan? Getting you to cook for me, Claude cheekily replied. Dimitri huffed a laugh from his nose, his eyes snapping to the elevator as the door slid open. Dimitri and Claude stepped inside. The blonde pushed the 7th floor button, keeping his other hand closed around his keys. The elevator rose and eventually came to a stop. Dimitri left the elevator with Claude close behind, walking down the right hallway. The walls, as well as the floor, were different colors from the lobby, a pale caramel painted over the walls, the floor tiles gray and dotted white. They passed a couple of chocolate-brown doors until Dimitri found his door. Dimitri pushed his key in, turning the golden doorknob. The door gave off a groan as it opened. With a warm smile, Dimitri huddled back into his apartment, slipping off his flip-flops. He placed the slippers by the door, glancing at Claude's shoes. Claude took one good look around Dimitri's living room. Dimitri was right to say that it wasn't small. The room was bigger than Claude's sorry excuse for a living room, and a whole lot cleaner. Whereas Claude's living room looked like a tornado had took a pit stop, trashed the area and left. Dimitri's living room was open like the man himself, an aged dark wood bookshelf pressed against an off-white wall, filled with books and an equally old photo album tucked away. A sprawling houseplant sat on a pretty low coffee table, a cute little cactus right next to it. A black leather couch was propped along another wall, facing a flat-screen TV that rested atop a polished electric fireplace stand. A few framed pictures were hung on the wall, depicting Dimitri and his friends, and one smaller photo of his mother and father. There was a small stand with shining gold awards and little trinkets. The living room came equipped with closet mirrors, the corners of the glass decorated with lion and bird rubber door stickers. Yeah, gotta say, your friends are right. The living room is big enough for Cyrus. Dimitri hummed, gently nodding. He gestured to his kitchen, going inside. Claude followed along, plopping into a seat. The lights were turned on, shining bright into the cooking area. Dimitri carefully opened his fridge, taking out twin sets of turkey bacon strips and 2 eggs. Opening up a drawer next to the fridge, Dimitri pulled out 4 sweet rolls. The blonde quickly set up, leaving Claude curious, setting aside 2 small plates on his counter. Dimitri got to work, retrieving a glob of butter with a knife, fruitlessly shaking it off above a bright orange nonstick pan. Claude found it a little funny that the butter managed to conquer a war veteran, as well as the slight frustration seeping from Dimitri. He eventually figured out a smarter way to get the butter on the pan, sliding it off the edge of the pan and poking it inside. He turned the stove on high heat, then low when the butter melted across the pan. He poured a small amount of cooking oil into another pan, the tiny pan being dwarfed in size when Dimitri brushed his hand against the handle. Dimitri briefly stared down the oil-coated pan, and Claude couldn't help but laugh then. The guy looked hilariously paranoid over the oil as he turned the knob, setting it incredibly low. Dimitri finally got to the cooking stage, worrying his bottom lip as he took off his gloves. A weight settled on his shoulder as he cracked an egg on the rim of the pan, making sure the egg yolk didn't expand in the pan as he waited for one side to fully cook. He moved on to placing the bacon in the smaller pan, poking at it when the oil roared to life with a sizzle. He monitored the stove like it was either about to explode in the next 5 seconds or burn the food into blackened sludge. It was a bit funny to watch. Dimitri bolted, his posture straightening as he cooked. You all right, Dimitri? Oh, yes, but I didn't ask how you like your eggs. Claude couldn't stop himself from grinning like a loon. A few snickers slipped past his lips. Don't worry about it, though. Claude paused, saving face. If I told you I liked my eggs runny, what would you do? Dimitri momentarily stopped what he was doing, his plastic spatula left frozen near the edge of the egg. You don't prefer your eggs that way, Dimitri replied, sounding a little argumentative and disgusted all at once. Claude, what's wrong with runny eggs, Dimitri? Much like Cyrus, Dimitri puffed up, though he was still careful of the spatula in his hand. He flipped the egg, placing the other once it cooked. Dimitri gave Claude a nice, dead-eyed stare. It just feels slimy. Ah, so you're a texture type of guy, Claude asked, instead of pointing out Dimitri's bare hands. You could say that. Dimitri flipped over the bacon, a little smile growing on his face when they finished cooking. The food will be done soon. And so it was. Dimitri placed a paper towel onto both plates, setting the bacon down before cutting his strips in half, doing the same with the eggs. He cleaned the knife and neatly sliced the sweet rolls into mini sandwiches. Dimitri lay each egg onto the bottom bun, topping it off with the bacon, removing the paper towels and putting 2 on each plate. The blonde ripped off more paper towels before putting them under the plates. Would you like a taste test? Dimitri asked, sounding a little anxious. Dimitri washed his hands, drying them with a beige kitchen cloth. He carried both plates. Sure thing, but why can't you? Dimitri awkwardly laughed, briefly scrunching up his face in discomfort. The plates were set down on the kitchen table, and Dimitri settled into his chair. He stared at his steaming food, unable to look Claude in the eye. Dimitri paused, almost making himself look smaller. I've had agusia ever since I turned 14. It was concerning how, in only a month, Claude's thoughts shifted gears. His very first thought in response wasn't, it'll be easy to poison my target, or this is something I can exploit. Instead it was, in that case, I can cook with him. I could describe how food tastes. I could tell him it's good. Even worse, if Dimitri had told him this a month ago, Claude wouldn't have wasted a second to dig and use that against him. He wouldn't have cared how something like this was a bombshell to drop for Dimitri, how scared he looked at the barest hint of judgment or pitying words. Then maybe I could cook for you sometime. Back home, we use a shit ton of spices, Claude muttered under his breath, thinking over the logistics. So if the food's incredibly spicy or sweet, never mind. If you want me to, that is. Claude was pinned by another one of Dimitri's sunshine-bright smiles, the blonde looking both incredibly happy and relieved. He was growing weaker and weaker to that smile, and Claude could do nothing but watch with pinkened cheeks. That golden smile dimmed for just a second. Dimitri's mouth popped open, delighted shock coloring his face. Claude, Dimitri whispered, his eye widening and crinkling. You're truly smiling. Claude wasn't even aware the smile he wore was real. His instincts screamed to school his expression, to fake it, to deny and deflect. For the first time in his life, Claude refused to listen. His smile turned a little bashful. Claude bit the bullet, asking, It's... Dimitri didn't look flustered one bit to answer, replying with zero hesitation. It's lovely. Claude's smile wobbled into something embarrassed, feeling blazing heat spread across his face. It was such a simple compliment, something he could have easily brushed off, usually something so insincere or said in a way that alienated him further. But Dimitri's words were so honest. Not a single part of the sentence had hidden intentions. No one really said those things to him and meant it. Claude didn't know what to do in this situation. Claude decided to sit there, all red-faced in silence as he finally took a bite. The food distracted him and tasted like heaven. The sweetness of the bun combined with the eggs and the chewy bacon exploded in his mouth. I can't believe both you and your food shut me up, Claude replied instead of saying thank you. Speaking of, it's really good. You did a great job. Dimitri offered Claude a sweet smile. "I did tell you I would have my vengeance, but I'm glad the food turned out right." "Right? It came out more than just right. I'd honestly have this every day if I could." It was Dimitri's turn to become the representative of a tomato farm. Hilariously enough, the blonde didn't even know how to react to a compliment either. He nodded in thanks, looking more like a shy kid than anything else. "So, what's on the agenda today? A house tour?" Claude asked, eating another mini sandwich. Dimitri lightly shook his head. "It may be a little boring, but perhaps we can watch some movies. What would you like to watch?" There was a time in Claude's life where he wanted to watch Disney movies out of desperation to connect with other kids. He knew nothing would change, so he just clung to his books, and eventually the chance to indulge slipped through his fingers. He didn't have the time. He couldn't get starry-eyed over singing princesses or classically animated tales when a gun was dropped into his hands, gunpowder and blood on his clothes. But maybe he could get wrapped up in a childhood he never had. Just for today. "Let's binge classic Disney movies." Claude's mouth ran without his say-so, spilling a truth. "I haven't watched a single one, so I'm looking forward to changing that." "We can do that. Just give me a minute to wash the dishes." "All right, I'll be on the couch then." Claude got up from his chair, and so did Dimitri, the blonde taking both plates and hanging around the sink. Claude walked out of the kitchen, calling out a sincere, "Thank you." He flopped down onto the couch like he owned it. Claude listened to the running water and the dishes clanking. Dimitri eventually emerged into the living room, his gloves back on his hands. Claude scooted over, giving Dimitri space to sit down. "Well, what would you like to watch first?" Claude drew a blank, allowing himself to make a face. The oldest one?" Dimitri smiled, showing teeth. "Snow White it is, then." Dimitri looked more excited than Claude was. Then again, Claude was currently being curb-stomped by his own disbelief. Claude knew his heart. He was well aware that he had created an iron wall around it, forged by his cynicism and the constant hate he endured. How his heart was reinforced with cold steel when he distanced himself from each murder. People had tried to get close to him, slamming a fist into his closed-off fortress, kicking at it, haunting his heart like a ghost, begging and pleading with a knife in their hand and a wide smile on their face. And then Dimitri happened, his target merely walking up to the towering, dangerous fortress and gently knocked. Claude was not unnerved by this, just how easy the gate to his heart started to creak open. Dimitri did nothing, had no motive. He didn't want anything from him, and yet... Claude distracted himself by watching Dimitri set up the movie, grainy, soft colors exploding onto the TV screen. Sitting next to Dimitri, surrounded by the cool, natural lights of the room, made Claude almost feel like a kid, like he was finally catching up on the things he missed. It was quiet, save for the signature princess's singing blaring from the speaker. The Disney movies rolled by, the room growing darker for the bleeding hours, and the scent of microwave popcorn in the air. Dimitri looked half asleep, taking to using the armrest as a pillow, staring at the screen. He smiled lazily, taking his eye off the TV and looking directly at Claude. Dimitri saw something Claude clearly didn't, the exhaustion settling in, breaking apart with a painfully delicate, sweet smile. "What?" Claude whispered, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing. How are you liking Mulan?" "Mushu's pretty funny." Dimitri's eye crinkled. Claude liked the movie, relating to Mulan, and he knew he'd connect to many more Disney characters. But for now, all he thought about was Mulan struggling to keep her secret close to her chest at first, hiding away with a disguise, bridging a gap between her and the other soldiers. He watched Mulan's secret unravel, and the army deserted her on a snowy mountain. Claude wasn't ready to give up the ghost entirely, but he felt the cold steel of his heart heat up. "Is it sad that you're the first actual friend I've ever had?" Dimitri's smile slipped some, the tender and melancholic look lighting in his eyes, making Claude uneasy. It wasn't pity, but it seemed to ask, how could anyone overlook you? How many people have cast you aside and forced you to guard your heart? Dimitri sighed, frowning. "It is a sad thought," he admitted, "but I am thankful, really, honored as well, for you to trust me enough. It's remarkable." Claude didn't make a single sound. Dimitri gave him another soft look, letting him process what he'd just heard. "It may be too soon to ask this of you, but would you care to meet my friends?" "Meeting your family already? Now I'm honored," Claude exhaled, dropping his joking tone. "Hey, Dimitri? Thank you." The moment Claude realized he started anticipating spending time with Dimitri over lodging a bullet in his brain, he knew doomsday was lurking closer and closer.
Ash, Annette, and Mercedes were akin to what Claude was currently doing with them, baking sweets and cooking meals, so incredibly sweet to the core. The kitchen thankfully wasn't a mess, though flour somewhat dusted Dimitri's countertop, spoons, used bowls, and other utensils used as tools dunked into the sink. Claude elected to play nice, or more on the edge of kind, because even now he felt like an outsider. And really, he was one, as much as his heart began to burn and cry out to connect with these people. Claude drew himself out of his thoughts, deciding to watch Dimitri and his friends interact. "Dimitri, here, take a cookie," Annette shouted, grinning from ear to ear, shoving a cooled but fresh cookie from the baking sheet. Dimitri turned to her, briefly stopping his stirring and holding out his spoon. He returned her starlight grin with a smile. "I'm sure it will be delicious." Despite being an adult, Annette puffed up her cheeks and groaned. "Dimitri!" Her voice softened a little. "You don't have to reassure me, you know. Even if you can't taste it, you can still enjoy it." "That's true." Annette's grin went a tad sharp, her eyes crinkling around the corners as she glanced at Claude. An idea clearly formed in her head, and she refused to let it go. She waddled over to him, dull blue eyes bright, whispering in his ear. "Hey, Claude, can you give him the cookie instead? I think that'll make him really happy." "Didn't take you for a schemer." Annette laughed, pulling back. "I'm not. We all just like seeing Meanie happy, and, you looked a little lonely." Claude's eyes widened, and the next moment he schooled his surprise. "I can do that." Annette cheered, handing over the chocolate chip cookie. Claude made his move, holding out the cookie and walking towards Dimitri. As friendly as Dimitri's friends were, Claude didn't feel comfortable with really smiling. Claude waved the cookie in the air once Dimitri glanced at him. "Course it's gonna be delicious. I'm giving it to you, aren't I?" Claude heard Ash gasp. Annette tried to stifle a cheer, and Mercedes quietly laughing as she prepared another baking sheet. What he focused on, though, was Dimitri, how pink roses bloomed on his cheeks, petals flying everywhere on his face, how his mouth opened and that sky-blue sapphire hurriedly glanced away. "What, you don't believe me?" Dimitri provided no verbal response, only smiling and taking the cookie from him. He broke the cookie before biting into it, grinning around the cookie like he could actually taste it. "Thank you, Annette." "Call me Annie, Meanie." Dimitri cleared his throat, correcting himself with a sheepish look. "Thank you, Annie. It was lovely." "Great, I'm super glad. The kids at the orphanage will definitely like them too." Dimitri nodded. He turned back to Claude with a question in his eye and a smile on his lips. Claude wouldn't ever be able to say no to him, and he was 100% blaming it on Dimitri. Dimitri held out the cookie for Claude to take. "I do hope it'll be the same for you." Claude schooled his expression, but he felt his mask burn and flake under his blush. "You? You're the worst." Dimitri laughed, but cut himself off, hiding his mouth with more of his cookie. Claude ate his, nodding to himself and humming. "Annette, this is great." "Thanks." Annette laughed a little. "You know, Mercy taught me how to bake. It was a nightmare at first." "Is your darling Mercy not the angel you guys think she is?" Annette sputtered out a laugh. No, Mercy's amazing." Mercedes smiled softly. "Thank you, Annie." "No problem," Annette chirped back, turning to Claude. "Mercy wasn't the problem. It was me. No, it was definitely me. I was pretty bad at cooking. Ooh, one time the pan exploded when I wasn't looking." Claude made a show of taking a step away from Annette. At her pout, he went back to his place with a cheeky smile. "Wow, how'd that happen?" Annette awkwardly laughed. "Well," she dragged the word out, "I kind of wasn't paying attention, and then it happened again." Annette sent a guilty look Ash's way. Ash merely chuckled, shaking his head. "And I destroyed Ash's pan." Claude choked down a laugh. "Annie, you don't need to feel guilty for that. It was years ago. I nearly burned down your restaurant. Did you look so mad at me?" "You burned down his restaurant?" Claude asked, bursting out laughing. Ash waved his arms around, the motion frantic. No! "Almost," Mercedes chirped, all relaxed and smiling, like nearly burning down a friend's workplace was just a little oopsie-poopsie. Claude loved this woman. From the corner, Dimitri pinched his brow, frowning. "Dudu wasn't angry with you. He was quite worried for you, and Ash as well." "I know," Annette mournfully wailed. "Yesterday's Annie did it." Dimitri poorly hid away a snort. Just to keep the conversation flowing, Ash snapped his fingers out of nowhere, turning to Claude. "Oh, I just remembered. You like archery, too, don't you, Claude?" Claude raised an eyebrow. "And just who told you that?"
Ash smiled fondly, letting out a near-quiet chuckle. I think you know. Ash's smile grew as Dimitri actually yelped in surprise. What made you take up archery? Claude wasn't too keen on answering. He still wanted to scope out these people, to analyze them. It was a family thing. Ash's smile briefly froze on his face, his pale green eyes flickering to Claude. Some sort of understanding flashed in them, and Ash didn't bother with prying. The guy just accepted his answer with a nod. What about you? Claude asked in return. When Ash blew out a sigh, Claude realized he'd earned himself a personal reason. It's honestly a long story. Like you, my love for archery was a family thing. My father spent time with me and my siblings outside, shooting toy arrows. It changed after my parents fell ill and passed. I was young and terribly desperate for money, so I signed up for archery tournaments. Ash grimaced, bittersweet memories washing over him. Those efforts weren't enough, though, so I started stealing. It's shameful, I know, but I had to provide for my little brother and sister. Claude shook his head, quietly interrupting. I wouldn't call that shameful. Not really. It's unfortunate, but you had to do something, right? Ash thinly smiled, a little pained. Yes, it made me feel so guilty, being happy, if that made sense. I would steal from people in the streets, stores, but seeing my little siblings smile, I just couldn't stop. And then I was caught. I was stupid. Really, I thought sneaking into a mansion was an amazing idea. I found a book, an old knight's tale, and I wanted to take it. I wanted to read to my siblings. A sheepish little laugh spilled from Ash's mouth. And I was selfish, so I wanted the book for myself. That's when Lenato found me. I was terrified at the time. I thought he would have called the police or even hurt me. But all he did was let me keep the book, as well as the money I took. Claude's bow quirked. Why Ash decided on giving his tragic backstory after Claude provided nothing in return was beyond him. Did Ash trust him already? Or did he trust him enough through association with Dimitri? Did he want to get this off his chest? Or worse, and far more manipulative, was Ash using the story to lure Claude in, to force his hand in the nicest way possible? That line of thinking was doubtful, to say the least, but anyone could be callous. After all, it was usually the kind, overly quiet and unassuming types that roared to life as monsters. How old were you? I was 9. Yeah, that probably makes me look worse, huh? Ash asked, sounding incredibly glum. If Khalid had taken to stealing, no one would really be happy. His mother and father would have scolded him from hell and back, dunking him right back into those fiery pits just to make it clear. The people in his hometown would have laughed and jeered, as if to say, of course he'd steal. Is he looking for scraps? What a poor thing, poor little Khalid. But Khalid wasn't an angel back then, not even one in disguise. He wasn't the cruelest person on the planet either. But at age 8, Khalid killed someone. A woman snuck into his bedroom, little Khalid foregoing the routine of shutting his window. He remembered feeling a body loom over his, a pillow smothering his face, his hands scrambling and wildly clawing at the assistant. Then there was a knife in his hand, and a blade tearing through a shirt, sinking into flesh with a terrible wet noise. A pained shout leaving the woman, the pill slipping off, the blood oozing from the woman's neck as she collapsed, dark eyes unseeing. At least his mother came rushing for him, taking in the scene and holding him like he mattered. Maybe Ash was herding Claude around, because an earnest but horrific reply flew from his mouth. Pretty sure murdering a lady when I was 8 is way worse, but all right. Everyone's attention was quick to zero in on Claude. It made him uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. The shock and horror on their faces made his heart go cold. What? Hold on. I don't want to pry, but Glottis, Claude. Terrible, right? Claude asked, a smile fixed on his face, eyes cold. Claude's smile faltered at the sight of Ash crying. A tear lined his eye, then another, fat globs of hot tears rolling down his freckled cheeks. His face reddened, and he couldn't hide or wipe his tears away, since he was occupied with cooking. It started an entire symphony of sniffles and hiccup breaths from the others. Sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have. Ash could barely say a thing, not with a clear lump in his throat, each time he tried speaking, resulting in hyperventilation. Whoa, hey, Ash, it's fine. I turned out fine. To that, Mercedes had to stop what she was doing, shaking her head and crying into her sleeve. She didn't regain all her composure, but she sidled up to Claude, holding out an arm. Claude cluelessly stared at the offending limb, having zero idea what Mercedes might have wanted, which caused another round of crying. To try and abate this, Claude took her hand and Mercedes pulled him into a loose hug. It was so easily escapable, like she knew he was skittish and ready to run. But it was still a hug. It was warm, so warm, and he felt a little embarrassed, thinking that a near stranger held him just like his mother would. The arms round him were light, unconstricting, and yet the presence was unbearably strong. It was solid, and for the first time in his life, Claude gave in to that warmth. He let himself be this type of selfish, and hugged her back. Mercedes only held him tighter, squeezing him for a second, her fingers gently pressing into his sides. She held him just like his mom did. Claude's entire frame started buckling, his shoulders hiking up and trembling, his fingers clawing into Mercedes' dark teal dress. A lump built itself in his throat, and his face reddened so bad that he practically felt fire on his skin. He curled into Mercedes' hug, bumping his forehead into her shoulder. A sniffle left his nose. Then harshened, quick breaths. Snot dribbled onto Mercedes' sweater. A wretched cry broke through his throat as Mercedes did nothing but weave her wet fingers into his hair. Dimitri's soft, broken call of his name made Claude lose it, crying harder. Claude didn't know where the tears were coming from, why it was happening in the first place. He shouldn't have allowed this, to be this vulnerable, to be this close, but the hug made him feel so secure, so at ease that he didn't care. A gloved hand slunk into his hair, replacing Mercedes' gentle fingers. He would have whirled around and attacked on reflex, but he was too drained to bother. Too trusting already, knowing who the hand belonged to. Dimitri's voice resounded behind Claude, shivers running down his back. "May I hold you?" "Yeah," Claude weakly croaked, his voice utterly wrecked. Mercedes loosened her grip, and Claude foolishly clawed at her back, a distressed noise slipping past his lips. A gasp came right after when Dimitri wrapped his arms around him, the hug fairly hot to the touch of warmth, protective even. It was tight, practically squeezing him. Mercedes snaked her hands out of the hug, leaving Claude in Dimitri's arms. This was the first time someone's ever bothered to hug me. These people really are something else. I should have known. Thank you. All of you. Thank you. Meeting Glenn and Dedu in an upscale and well-kept MMA gym was an experience. It was bordering on late night, the visitor count low, and the only souls in the building being Claude and Dimitri's band of loyal family members. Claude smiled down at Glenn, his eyes not ready to warm. It definitely sunk into the ice-cold territory when Glenn continued to study him, leaning forward in his wheelchair. Blue-gray eyes watched him, looking Claude all the way up and down. His snarky smile had already vanished into a thin line. "Something wrong?" Claude asked, keeping up a faked, pleasant smile. "Just thinking." Glenn's eyes never left his, unable to be crowed even by an assassin lying in wait. Then something broke in his expression. Glenn nodded and deciding without saying a word. At Claude's raised eyebrow, Glenn tilted his head some, his long wavy hair spilling over his shoulder. "I'll be real with you, kid." Glenn's eyes bore into Claude's soul like he knew exactly who he was, and panic rose under his skin. "I've seen that look in someone's eyes before." "What look?" Claude pressed, his frown hiding clenched teeth. The tension festering in Claude's body burned under the bright lights, watching a slow, soft smile bloom on Glenn's face. It was the exact same one he gave to Dimitri when the blonde was clearly looking goofy and warm and infectious, his smile getting covered up in something chaotic when he asked Dedu to do a wheelie for him. Dedu secretly quirked his lips and refused, listening to Glenn jokingly complain. "What look?" Glenn rolled his eyes so hard that Claude felt the tiniest bit worried for the guy. He sharply groaned, the smile eroding away some. "So impatient, God's damn!" Glenn's voice rose in pitch, mocking Claude with a surprisingly sweet smile. "What look? That's you! Like, damn, I thought Princess Dimitri said, and I quote, 'Oh, Glenn, he's so kind. I swear to you, he's love—'" Dimitri lost his polite gentleman stick, chucking a boxing glove at the back of Glenn's wheelchair. Glenn cackled like a madman, leaning his head back without a care in the world. Claude looked over to where Dimitri was, the blonde's rapid-fire punches halted, a dark blue boxing glove missing. His face was flushed red, and his hair was a little frazzled, slipping out of its loose ponytail. "Glenn!" Glenn sputtered another long laugh, deepening his voice to impersonate Dimitri. "Claude is such a good man. Glenn, it feels as though he's a star. He's so bright and beautiful." Dimitri knocked off the other boxing glove, marching over to Glenn like a raging bull. He was insanely careful, slowing his pace and gently clapping a hand over Glenn's mouth. His signature, "I can take the Grim Reaper's soul myself," glare was muddled by his embarrassment. Hot red cheeks. Glenn chuckled against his pale, scarred hand, wiggling an eyebrow. He freed himself, turning his wheelchair to face Dedu. Though Glenn was no longer facing Claude, he could spot a lovely, evil grin forming on Glenn's face. It was nothing like the ones Claude's siblings had. Claude felt a little envious of that. "Right, Dedu? Dimitri came here with the same thing, right?" "Dedu, don't you dare!" Dedu held a large hand over his mouth, sealing away his smile. It was painfully obvious by how his dull green eyes crinkled at the corners. The open expressions in Dedu's eyes kind of jerked Claude into shock. The guy was relatively unemotive, almost as cold as Claude was. But that, too, was a mask, to remain unassuming through a heavy amount of stoicism. It made Claude feel like Dedu was Dimitri's loyal protector or something. That was a silly thought, because Dimitri was 6'2", looked like he battled demons on his bad days, had incredible strength, but he had a terribly weak, bleeding heart for others to take. So maybe Claude's notion wasn't all that childish. Dedu cleared his throat, his lips set in a neutral line, his eyes still warm as he glanced at Dimitri. "He may have." "Dedu!" "My apologies." It was actually kind of hard to tell if Dedu was serious or not. His deep voice was also as unemotive as his face. It was a pain to try and figure it out, but since Dimitri knew Dedu for so long, he sniffed the guy out very quickly. "You know you don't mean that," Glenn cried out before bursting into laughter again, even slapping his knee and bowing his head. His composure straightened out, though his face was still bright red. Dedu's eyes rounded on Claude, this time. Now that Dimitri was paying attention, the blonde groaned. What's up, Dedu?" Claude earned an even more flat look from Dedu, his silver-gray eyebrows furrowed, meeting the bridge of his nose. The towering man's posture tensed, rippling with a surge of protectiveness. "Dimitri trusts you." Claude's eyes flew wide open, sensing a threat lurking in Dimitri's first 3 words. "And I have no doubts of his judgment." Glenn fake coughed into his fist. "Most of the time." Dedu continued like he didn't hear Glenn's obvious side comment. "But if you choose to harm him in any way, I will take action." Claude's voice died in his throat. It was different. Dedu's threat was way, way off base from the things Claude heard. In Elmira, on the job, charged with rage, eyes freezing over with murder on their minds, spat at him. The sort of threat was bound with expression, with love for another, trust in him, a killer. I don't think I can promise, not harming him." Claude actually winced. "I mean, maybe I'll say something or do something stupid." Claude felt himself sweat when Glenn's eyes hyper-focused on him again. "And honestly, I'm not really a great person." Feeling uncomfortable, Claude glanced back at Glenn. The moment he did, he felt like he was shoved into freezing cold waters. A knowing look filtered in Glenn's eyes, like he saw this song and dance before, like he's heard similar words. It scared the shit out of him, and his stomach churned when Claude briefly spotted a near-identical look in Dedu's eyes. Dedu grimaced, ever so slightly, watching Claude in tandem, like he was trusting Claude to hold a fragile object and not shatter it in one go. An instinct crawled to the back of Claude's mind, and he took a step back. The pair of overprotective brothers, of course, noticed, and thankfully backed off. Dimitri scolded both of them, a deep frown on his face. Past Claude believed in provoking, of poking the bear and seeing boundaries shatter in discomfort or anger. If he tried it with Glenn and Dedu, it would have gotten him in the lion's den, even if he received the answers he wanted. Glenn was vicious, hot-blooded. Dedu was a damn good steel wall, unapproachable and silent. Setting them off and pushing them was a terrible, terrible idea, so Claude didn't voice a thing. The air flowed back into normalcy, Glenn wearing a smirk on his face, asking Dimitri to box with him. Dimitri rushed to refuse, making Glenn laugh. Eventually, Dimitri went back to brutalizing a punching bag, keeping a keen eye on Dedu and Glenn every few seconds. Glenn blew out a sigh, looking up into the bright lights like he was seeking guidance. His face dropped back to Claude, a thin frown on his face. "I'll admit, ganging up on you and watching you die was a little fun, but definitely not a great thing to do." Glenn huffed out a breath, a flash of a smirk blooming onto his face. "So, I'm sorry. Don't think Dedu feels the same. He's a mother hen, that one." Instead of refuting Glenn, Dedu sharply nodded. "It's just, Dimity's always been the way you see him now. Sure, there's a shit ton of rough edges, but He's kept that big heart of his. You sure you want to lay that out with Dimitri right there? Glenn scoffed, waving a hand and dismissing Claude altogether. What's he gonna do? Break my legs? Anyway, Glenn's voice softened. Anyway, he's always felt so much for other people, so, he's kinda trusting. Kind of? He trusts a criminal, invite the guy to tea and ignore the fact that the idiot broke into his house. Oh, he used to be that level of trusting. Now his heart's a little guarded. Not that I blame him. It's not that he's afraid of being hurt, it's the other way around. Ever since... Glenn's gaze darkened. Ever since the war, he spat, viciously shaking his head. Dimitri has been so scared of hurting someone else, of slipping so bad that he shuts us out or lashes out. A little ways back when I lost the use of my legs, he just... Moving on, he's already been through betrayal. He's been through getting hurt. And you don't want that happening again. Obviously, but that's hardly my point. I know what I saw in your eyes. Like I said, I've seen it before. And I think you'll make the right choice. Claude's mouth popped open. Tell me, what look? What are you seeing? Just tell me. You're gonna have to look in a mirror for that. It's a nice look on you. Makes you look less of a zombie. Less of a zombie. Less of a toy soldier? When did that happen? Claude abruptly froze, his eyes painfully wide. When did I stop thinking of Dimitri as a target? When did I stop searching for his weaknesses? When did I stop thinking of harming him? Claude eyed the floor, clenching both fists. When did I start caring for Dimitri? Will I be able to kill him? Would I? Claude's eyes flicked back to Dimitri. The blonde noticed, pausing his assault and turning to him. When he grinned, practically baring his teeth, outshining the sun itself, Claude found his immediate answer. And when Dimitri quickly figured out what Claude's silence meant, he rushed over, worried. Claude couldn't force away the unburied morals he had previously left for dead. Exactly 1 month later, Claude figured out just why Glenn and Dudu looked at him like that. Dimitri sat with his final line of defense, happily chatting away in a coffee shop. A Glenn look-alike, or, in reality, Glenn's brother, was busy berating Dimitri. He was the definition of a grumpy cat. Whatever he was saying was lost to the void of bustling noise. But judging by how he threw the rest of his food into Dimitri's plate and violently gestured, Claude had a feeling he was fussing over the blonde. Another blonde, with dark green eyes, rolled her eyes like this was normal, quietly scolding Mr. Pissed in Your Cereal. What made Claude speed walk towards them like a bullet train, though, was a shock of blood-red curls. Blood-red curls that he so dearly recognized. Ruin rolled his shoulders, setting his tea back down on the table. He looked back, staring directly at Claude with a slow, fake smile stretching across his face. His honey-brown eyes were cold as Claude last saw them, exactly like a corpse. Ruin was supposed to be dead. He was assumed to be killed in action, yet here he was, clearly alive and kicking. Claude swallowed, clenching his teeth around the wide smile he definitely didn't fear. Something like terror zapped in his spine, flooding his nervous system. He felt cold all over, his eyes trained on Ruin because he had to fake his composure. Fuck. Fuck! Do they know about him? Who he actually is? Will he hurt? The tension was immediately sliced with a knife when Felix rudely swiped a forkful of Ruin's food and stuffed it in the redhead's mouth. Ruin actually choked, the dead look in his eyes shattering. Watch yourself. Ruin casually saluted Felix, smiling around the fork. Felix narrowed his eyes and slid the fork out, pointedly waving it at the taller man. Felix! Ruin whined like a baby, the adoring look in his eyes plain to see. I didn't do anything. The blonde challenged that statement with a raised eyebrow, sipping her tea. Claude had no idea why she looked so powerful or how the hell she got Ruin to look sheepish. Sylvain, don't antagonize him. Ingrid, I breathed and you're accusing me? I thought we had something. Felix scoffed. Your smile was fake. I hate it. Sylvain's posture shifted, looking a bit smaller as his shoulders slightly hunched. That deadly energy swarming him finally went out like a light. Sorry, Sylvain muttered, the single word holding a weight Claude really didn't expect. I know it. Sylvain's voice lowered even further. Claude awkwardly settled in his seat, still painfully on edge. Seeing Ruin in the bleak halls, talking to him, reminded Claude of a puppet with its strings cut, a doll mechanically going through the motions. A plastic smile formed on his face, his frozen honey-brown eyes half-lidded, showing nothing, being nothing. how his smile darkened around the edges, finally meeting his eyes as he recounted his latest mission, that sardonic, beaten-down laugh slipping past his crafted ones when he told Claude he'd let his targets use him for pleasure, and that he'd do the same before firing a gun. Seeing Sylvain for the past nearly 60 seconds made Claude realize he's alive. He's free. The way his sun blotted out the shadows surging him, looking as real as the sun shining above them, how the cold of his eyes was traded for something so warm and vibrant. It was like he walked past ruin, surrounded by the dark yet moving forward. Even if ruin looked back and tried to pull him in, Sylvain didn't let him. Claude wanted to grab Sylvain by his shoulders and ask what the hell happened. How did he defect? Did he know what the Eisners planned? Felix interrupted Claude's mounting questions by being as blunt as possible. "So you're Claude?" Claude's brow quirked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I'm merely asking." Felix's eyes briefly caught his before darting to stare at Claude's eyebrows. "And honestly, I'm hardly impressed." Claude refused to bristle, to feel hurt by Felix's immediate rejection. "Felix!" Dimitri whisper yelled, admonishing his childhood friend. "Shut it, bore!" Felix flicked his eyes back to Claude, forcing him to keep eye contact. "You look exactly like Sylvain did, and it makes me sick." Claude felt his eyes widen. Felix huffed, his default angry frown shifting into a scowl. "Everyone else trusts you, especially the boar. If you break that trust, then there's truly no hope for you." "Is that a threat?" Claude asked, his nerves on fire, itching for some security. "It's the truth." Claude stopped breathing, a chill swarming him. He opened his mouth to say anything at all, and he couldn't. If he'd hurt Dimitri and sent him back to his own hell, they'd never forgive him. If he killed him after making friends with him, after forming these feelings in his chest, Claude would be dragged into his old ways. Dimitri's blood on his hands would never leave. It would run warm to mock him, drown him. Claude understood. He jerked his head into a nod, glancing away like Felix was so much bigger than him. He forgot what that felt like, how it felt being Khalid, crushed by the look in someone's eyes, knowing it wasn't worth a damn. He forgot what that felt like, how it felt being Khalid, crushed by just one look in someone's eyes, knowing he wasn't worth a damn thing. Claude cleared his throat, a frown slipping on his face. "I get it." Claude wanted to prove Felix wrong, to defend himself, to do something to even be remotely accepted. He thought he buried those feelings in Elmira with each body. Claude guessed they'd been waiting to crawl out of their graves. Felix continued to watch him, all silent and wanting to strike like a snake. His gaze snapped to Sylvain, his eyes going wide as he was pulled into a one-armed hug. The man sputtered, kicking up a fuss despite melting into Sylvain's side. Sylvain's lips curled into a genuine, soft smile, and he pressed a kiss to Felix's temple. "Don't look so stressed, sweetheart. You're going to get gray hairs." "Fuck you," Felix muttered. Sylvain whispered something into Felix's ear, making the blue black-haired man flush bright red. Sylvain's smile shifted, turning sinful, his eyes going half-lidded and dark before the look shattered with a happy snicker. Then he pouted, playfully poking Felix's arm. "What's wrong, Fee?" "I'm going to strangle you." Sylvain laughed, squeezing Felix into a hug. Still holding Felix, he tore his honeyed gaze away and glanced at Claude. A loose frown found Sylvain's face, his eyebrows furrowing. "He's scared." Sylvain's eyes skittered towards Ingrid before landing on Claude again. "They both are." Claude hated the feeling in his stomach, how crushed his heart was. If they were terrified of him like everyone else, when would Dimitri be unable to look at him? When would he start cowering and running far away? "I will be entirely honest. Sylvain's right," Ingrid said, nodding and crushing Claude's heart further. "We're scared of the possibility of you running from Dimitri." "What? What?" Ingrid set her eyes on her plate, the hold on her fork ironclad. "It's foolish on my part, I know. It's just—" The words spill out of Claude's mouth in an instant. "I won't run." The brief thought of it soured. In his early life, he learned to run. He'd bolt at the slightest smile, a hand reaching for him. He grew up and learned how to run in a new way, deflecting every comment towards him with a fake smile and silver-tongued words. He ran, detaching himself from the murders carved into his skin, ignoring the boy he used to be screaming at him, pleading. It was a learned behavior, something that became instinctual, like breathing. Claude couldn't run from Dimitri. It terrified Claude himself, but, if anything, he would run towards him. Dimitri gave him a wide-eyed, hopeful look that Claude drowned in. You... Dimitri whispered, sounding like he barely believed what he just heard. Do you mean that? Truly? I don't think I'll lie about that, Dima. Claude's world had shrunk down to Dimitri, a tentative smile worming its way onto his face, his crystal blue eye hazy with quiet joy. He looked soft, like all those jagged edges were peeled away and soothed over. Claude was curled up on Dimitri's couch, with the blonde sitting close enough to bump shoulders. Dimitri had given up a fluffy, dark blue blanket, draping it over Claude's shoulders. He left when Claude took to cocooning himself. The living room was swamped in darkness, the only source of light being the TV screen. They were halfway through a YouTube video, something that incessantly bugged Dimitri's recommendation page, a full hour focusing on the difference between faking mental illness during an interrogation and the eerie yet polite cadence of a killer. Throughout the video, Dimitri would constantly glance at him, his nerves making him shake a little before snapping his gaze onto the TV. And Claude came to an abrupt revelation after 3 months of knowing Dimitri. Oh, I'm in love with him. Claude fell for him. It was a gradual thing, the steel of his heart shattering day by day. It snuck up on him, lying in wait to finally grab at his throat. At first, it was Dimitri's kindness that lured in his heart, when Claude started to realize that the blonde wasn't playing up his princely act. It was just him. His smile made Claude stop suspecting Dimitri, something so bright it hurt to look at, and Dimitri smiled like that at him. Sometimes it was an exasperated one, accompanied by an eye roll. Sometimes it was a wide, open-mouthed smile, eyes nearly closed and crinkled. And most of the time, it was something so soft, so fond. The late-night texts and quick break-time videos of Cyrus goofing off, Dimitri waving at the camera, the Disney movie marathons that would spark stupid debates or mindless side comments, and quiet sing-alongs, trying out the food Dimitri cooked, in turn, letting Dimitri taste test. Claude loved him. He loved him. He loved him. He knew it was an all-around bad idea to follow his heart. He would eventually have to... Claude hid his wry, troubled smile with the blanket. Can't even finish that sentence, can you, Failnaught? He's made me weak. So weak. And yet, I think I'm okay with that. I don't mind Dimitri being my weakness. I don't mind at... Dimitri once again flicked his gaze onto Claude, his anxiety shoved into the background. He practically vibrated in his seat, biting his bottom lip. His strength came into play, and a stream of blood ran down his chin. Dimitri's face tried desperately to blank out, but all it accomplished was a fairly lethal glare. Dima? Dimitri shook his head, taking in a deep breath and trying again. I must speak with you. Claude immediately paused the video. He shuffled to fully face him, bringing his hands out of the blankets. Claude's brow quirked. A worried frown sat on his face almost instantly. Something wrong? Dimitri hung his head like he was an inmate awaiting execution, shoulders hunched and looking tiny. Dimitri licked his lips, brushing a gloved hand against his arm. I apologize. I have been deceiving you. The blonde slowly looked back up, his single blue eye wild with dread. I am not a good man. It began after the tragedy. The capital of Fargus, my home, was attacked. Buildings were set ablaze. Innocent people were gunned down before my eyes. My own father. Dimitri covered his face with his hands. Glenn ran to me. He almost died for me. He was shot, and that scream, it still terrifies me. If Glenn hadn't lived, I would have been the sole survivor. I wanted answers. I wanted revenge. Hearing Glenn sob outside his hospital room, Sylvain going missing during the tragedy, Duskar being wrongfully accused and raised to ash, I was livid. I couldn't get rid of the rage in my heart. So I used it. I signed up for mixed martial arts classes, for tournaments. I destroyed myself. I was arrested for assault charges when I turned 17, but they were false. I never touched a hair on Rufus's head. I was in a tournament the entire day and in no way near my uncle. I realized that arrest was a ploy. While I sat in a cell, a prison guard, Cornelia told me just who committed the tragedy. I was foolish, blinded by anger, and I believed that when... She said it was my stepsister, Elle. And I believed her. Cornelia dangled the promise of revenge before me, and I took it. Cornelia? Wait. Dimitri curled into himself, swiftly looking at the floor and crossing his arms. The moment I agreed, she drugged me. I awoke in a new place, an underground bunker of sorts. I can still remember how odd the floor looked, deep black and glowing blue lights. I was trapped in another cell and... Dimitri grit his teeth. And Cornelia said my captors often chose to torture me, leaving me starving, cutting my skin open, breaking my fingers. They began to experiment on me and infusing something into my body, and it hurt. A rash broke out on my skin. My head pounded. The room seemed to blur and shake, and I felt like I was burning alive. Deep black and blue lights. Deep black and blue lights. Gods, no. No, no, this is... I struggled to escape my binds. I screamed, thrashed as best I could. Cornelia, she grew annoyed with me, and she stabbed my right eye. Dimitri traced the edge of his eye patch, keeping his hand over the strap like he wanted to remove it. I want to show you, but I can't. I can't. It's too unsightly. Dima, Claude whispered, his voice rolling out firm when he refused to look at him. Dimitri. Dimitri shuddered, slowly locking his gaze onto Claude. He looked miserable, his pale face reddening, tears slipping past his eye. Don't force yourself, all right? I'm glad you want to show me, and I hardly think it'll be unsightly. You use that word for shitty paintings, not surviving, not for scars. A new, fresh wave of tears rolled down Dimitri's cheeks, his face crumbling. A hiccup escaped his lips, and his shaking hand gently tugged his eye patch off. A closed eyelid greeted him, a messy faded scar laying across the skin. The scar on his eyelid stretched as it fluttered open. His eye socket was empty. No eye, not even a fake. I know it is... Claude fully shed his blanket, reaching out to hug Dimitri. He heard Dimitri's breath hitch, felt him sink into his hold. Claude quietly shushed him, threading his fingers through Dimitri's hair. I won't think any less of you. I will never look down on you. Claude, please. Dimitri seethed, his broken-down wail muffled by Claude's shirt. Dimitri's hands dug into his back, threatening to tear open Claude's shirt. His heart was already bleeding for this man, already carved a small space for him. A sob left Dimitri's mouth, and Claude belatedly realized his own eyes were pricked with tears. The experiment proved successful, with cheap dosage, and I gained a crest. Dimitri let out a ragged breath. Monstrous strength, and they told me Edelgard was at fault for my arrest, for my torture. Dusker, I was too far gone, too much of a wild animal, and I clung onto their words. Cornelia let me escape. I wandered the woods, the slums, hunting for Elle. I became a demon, killing without question, flying into ranges, lost to my ghosts. 3 years into the war, Elle sieged. I found her. My rage had reached a boiling point. I remember wanting to... Dimitri choked, sucking in air. Break her neck, crush her skull, because I could. Because I had done the very same to others so easily. Before I could act on anything, a green-haired woman emerged from the battlefield. I could sense it. How powerful she was. She almost seemed inhuman. All she did was stare at us, at me, and simply ordered Elle to halt her war, promising Edelgard she could carry the torch. Her eyes bore into mine. She looked so distraught when she told me to live for what I believe in, that Elle had nothing to do with Dusker. A green-haired woman. The woman left, and my friends pulled me out of the war. I was, the closest to feral, I suppose. I lashed out often. I kept away from them. Even Dedu and Glenn. I would refuse to eat. Claude held him as tight as he could, cradling Dimitri's head in his shoulder. I'm not in a position to judge you, you know, and I'm not willing to make you feel worse when it's already hanging over your head. Dimitri sniffled, a shiver climbing down his frame. Claude? Yeah, Dimi? Dimitri paused, his crest activating as Claude screamed under his gloved fingertips. Dimitri drew in a deep breath, his pale gold locks tickling Claude's neck. He didn't pull away from the hug, but he leaned back to get a proper look at Claude. His eyes darted around the room and eventually rounded on Claude again, just as intense as a thunderstorm. "Claude, the truth is, I have long since fallen for you." Once the words flew out of Dimitri's mouth, his face was paler than snow. Ashen. Claude. No, Khalid. Remembered feeling just like that. Terrified of vulnerability, of being stomped on. Rejected entirely. Dozens of hands pushed him aside, harmed him. All they saw was a disfigured feral mutt. Demon spawn. And then there was Dimitri. There was Dimitri, encroaching on his space, curious and kind to a fault, not seeing the monster behind a cage. "You love me?" Claude dumbly repeated. Dimitri drew away from the hug, going stiff as he set his fists on his lap. He sharply nodded and stared at his gloves. Claude swallowed, clearing his throat. "Say it. Tell me." Dimitri's mouth popped open, his eye growing wide. His cheeks flared pink, and the flash of a smile appeared on his face. "I love you, Claude. I treasure you dearly. I want you by my side." Claude wore a crooked, wobbly smile. He felt his eyes crinkle in the corners, a rush of happiness seeping under his skin, the heat burning on his cheeks. "I love you too, with everything I am. Claude was cut off by his own squeak. Dimitri squeezed him into a tight hug, an elated laugh bubbling from his throat. His hands felt warm, even with his gloves. Claude was practically crushed into Dimitri's chest, pressed up against him. "Claude," Dimitri's voice pitched low, sounding like gravel in his ear. "My beloved." Claude smiled, laughing a little. "Hate to break it to you, but my real name's Khalid. Hope that does—" "It's a lovely name," Dimitri murmured. Shivers spread along Khalid's back. "Well, you gonna say it then?" "Khalid." Claude's real name slowly rolled out of Dimitri's mouth like he was testing every letter. "Khalid. Khalid." Goosebumps raised on Khalid's arms. His blush deepened in color. His hands trembled, blindly grabbing onto Dimitri. Dimitri kept chanting his name like it was something special, something worth saying. Claude wiggled in Dimitri's arms, and the blood loosened his hold with a confused noise. "Claude?" Claude tried and failed to smile impishly, his smile turning all mushy and bright without his permission. At Dimitri's perplexed look, Claude couldn't help but laugh, smiling even more. His hand inched closer to Dimitri's lips, his thumb covering over his mouth. Claude leaned forward, and the blonde turned to beautiful bright red. Claude's smile shifted to a smirk when his lips ghosted over Dimitri's pinkened ear. "You know," Claude whispered in Dimitri's ear, his deepening voice paired with a slight chuckle, "I've been waiting to have you, and I didn't even realize until just now." Claude lowered his thumb, spreading out his hand and gently nudging Dimitri's chest. The blonde went wide-eyed, mouth parting with a soft "oh." His eyes briefly darted to the TV, slowly presenting his gloved hands. It was Claude's turn to become shell-shocked, hesitantly tracing his thumb along the fabric. He drew 2 fingers near the cuff, slowly raising his head. You want me to take your gloves off?" Claude said, breathless, eyes wide. Dimitri only smiled, a mere light twitch of his lips, the crystal blue eye going half-lidded and shining with clear affection. Trust. Claude sat frozen in his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen Dimitri's hands before, due to cooking countless meals, other small moments that required his bare hands. But the man would always shy away, slipping on his gloves the second he was done. But this was different. So different. He trusts me. Dimitri trusts me. Khalid remembers being surrounded by a ring of kids, a taller boy leaving the ring to stand in front of him. He pushed Khalid to the ground, scowling at his tears. How quick Khalid curled into a ball. The boy's chocolate brown eyes were frigid, disgusted. His words were so much louder than the jeers thrown at him. "They'll hate you. No matter where you look, no one will accept something like you." The boy turned his face away, covering his nose like Khalid smelled foul. "They'll think you're hideous, an animal, that you're weak, and you'll know I'm right." A pair of black gloves proved him wrong, waiting, allowing to be slipped off, unspoken trust lingering on a sweet, delicate smile. Claude huffed out a disbelieving laugh, trying to get his heart under control. His hands were jittery, a nervous energy swarming off him. His fingers caught on a glove, and he slowly pulled it off, watching the leather curl in on itself. A hint of a raised scar gradually became uncovered.
faded pink-red splotchy burns climbing up the back of his hand. His fingers were a little warped, his index finger bending in an odd shape when he flexed it. The glove fell into Dimitri's lap. Claude closed his fingers around Dimitri's bare hand, lightly rubbing his thumb over Dimitri's knuckles. He freed Dimitri's left hand from his glove. Dimitri kept his eye on Claude, refusing to relinquish eye contact. He jumped in his seat when Claude pressed a hand onto his chest, his rosy cheeks returning with a vengeance. Claude smirked, a part of him feeling darkly satisfied when Dimitri fell back onto the couch, peering up at him. He leaned forward, pinning Dimitri in place. The blonde didn't squirm. He didn't look even remotely uncomfortable. "You can break out of this if you wanted to." Dimitri's lips curled into a smile, a little laugh leaving his mouth. "I certainly can." Dimitri snaked his hand behind Claude's head, his warm fingers sinking into his hair and pushing him closer. "But I would like to stay in your arms a little longer." Blazing heat pooled in Claude's body. He stared down at Dimitri, blushing to high hell, unable to say a word. Dimitri didn't bother to take pity on him, a particularly smug smile dancing on his lips. Claude didn't believe in one-upmanship, but flustering Dimitri felt good. At first, Claude honestly wanted to chip at him and get under Dimitri's skin, seeing what made him tick, what it would take to snag that mask of his. But now, watching Dimitri's face flush red and look away, the bashful smile growing on his face, made Claude really happy. He looked beautiful like that. Claude's lips quirked into a smirk that immediately bloomed into a lovesick smile. "If that's the case, mind if I indulge you?" Dimitri's face bloomed red. Claude watched him swallow, watched the crystal blue of his eye darken, eclipsed by a blown-out pupil. The tips of his tongue peeked out from chapped lips, licking them over. His eye was already half-lidded, his gaze locked onto Claude. His smile was softened around the edges, just as love-struck as Claude felt. "Of course, Khalid," Dimitri replied, his voice pitching low, a trace of a growl in his words. Claude leaned in, his eyes slipping shut when his lips gently pressed against Dimitri's. A flame licked at Claude's beating heart, that candlelit flame gradually surging into a wildfire. Claude trailed his hands along Dimitri's side, settling on his lap. He barely did a thing, and yet Dimitri's fingers dug into his hair, his nails grazing his scalp. Claude shuddered, letting loose a groan. He took a gamble, really out of curiosity, wanting to nip at that selfish dark satisfaction. Claude gripped Dimitri's hip hard, his head buzzing at the moan leaving the Glon's mouth. He let up on the pressure, smoothing the skin over with a brush of fingers, even as his brain screamed to see that pale skin darken with a bruise. Dimitri's hand slipped out of his hair, gently cupping his face. The blonde hesitated for a moment, running the tip of his tongue along Claude's bottom lip. Claude reassured him almost immediately, his mouth gently falling open. Claude made a pleased hum in the back of his throat as Dimitri deepened the kiss, the very end of his tongue slowly swirling against his. Claude was burning alive, and he oh so greedily wished to drag Dimitri with him. Their kiss turned frenzied, sloppy, Dimitri's hand hot to the touch when it lingered on his back. Claude keeping a heavy hand on the blonde's thigh. Claude pulled away with a sharp smirk, eyeing the thin line of saliva gleaming on Dimitri's chin. The blonde beneath him looked drunk, his face flushed cherry red, hazy-eyed, a sleepy and delighted smile on his lips. Claude trailed a thumb over Dimitri's brow, lacing their hands together. Claude loved him. He felt at home with Dimitri. He wanted to be selfish and keep trusting this man, give his heart up again and again. But Failnaught still had a mission to complete. He had to kill his target. Eventually. Claude lay in bed, his bedroom drenched in darkness. He rubbed at his eyes, a groan spilling from his mouth. Claude's head lolled, staring up at the bright red numbers glowing on the ceiling. 3:42. For a long moment, Claude tightly shut his eyes. He opened them back up, a deep frown etched onto his face as he caught the sight of his handgun. It rested innocently on his nightstand, unloaded, but a row of golden bullets were neatly grouped together. Claude's heart twisted and he immediately snapped his gaze away. Every time he chanced to glance at the gun, passed by his hidden poisons, even his own switchblade, he was assaulted by an outcome he hardly wanted, picturing blood soaking a glistening blade, crimson spots dripping onto clean floorboards, a gunshot wound to Dimitri's head as he slept, blood creeping into blonde bangs. Dimitri accepting food from Claude without question, getting sicker and sicker with each meal. Each thought, each image, no matter how short, tortured him. It felt like a knife was taken to his skin, his flesh slowly flayed open. Claude didn't know what to do. For the first time in his entire life, he didn't have a single plan in mind. His mission was to assassinate his target, but the goal was rather muddied from the start. The moment a name and a face replaced the static hit, victim, target, the house of cards Claude built crumbled. Thinking of taking digs, manipulating Dimitri made Claude feel disgusting. Thinking of hurting him, whether it be emotionally or physically, made Claude's stomach twist into knots. Thinking of ending his life, even with muscle memory of loading a gun, aiming and pulling the trigger, kept Claude awake at night. And then, it was the guilt taking Claude's heart and eating it whole. He knew about Cornelia, about the discomforting, sleek black walls and floors, about that strange green-haired woman. He knew because he took the hands of the white-haired, ghastly man, let his dreams burn to ash. He became an assassin in exchange for his own humanity. Khalid hoped. He hoped that Fodlan would have been different. Even with that tiny voice of reason in his head, he prayed that people would greet him with a smile, that they would be kind to him. Claude knew better than to expect anything good, the people of Fodlan following the same script, changing up words to better apply the Almiran menace narrative, to wallow in fear and hate so subtly that it almost left Claude questioning himself. People would still brush right past him, and if he were hounded by a group or even one person, bystanders would look on like they wanted to step in. Crowding him like a 17-year-old boy getting assaulted by a mob was a spectacle. He was sick of it. He was so tired of waiting, of making sidewalks and train stations to his home, bundled only in a ratty wool blanket and a paper-thin old coat, on the cusp of starvation, clawing at his empty stomach. A man with sharpened purple eyes and long brown hair had found him sitting in an alley. The sky was foggy, grayed out by heavy snowfall coating the streets. Claude remembered reaching for a knife at the sound of footsteps, pulling it out when the man loomed over him, despite patiently standing there. He didn't trust the man, but he was cold, so cold and hungry, because he didn't want to steal. He still didn't want to be weak. All the man did was simply hand him a plastic cup of steaming tea and a freshly toasted bagel. When he left, Claude believed he would never see him again, but the man showed up again the next morning. He introduced himself, his voice fairly calm, but teetering on the edge of something sinister. Volkhard Arundel was his name, and with Claude's wary attention captured, Volkhard started talking, of understanding his plight, of having a safe place to stay, food to eat, other kids just like him. Claude ignored the warning signs and went with him. Once they arrived at the base, there were no prying eyes that would see Volkhard. The man changed his appearance, thin black sludge dripping from his body and across the floor. He had smirked. His slicked-back white hair dyed a light blue from the bright ceiling lights. The undead creature laughed something mad, revealing his true form right out of the gates. Thalas, the head of Shambhala. Claude remembered feeling small, trapped. A firm hand on his shoulder and a gun placed in his hand sealed his fate. He was molded into a killer, assigned a number like he was some test subject, and later a name when he was strung a line of hits. And then the Eisners arrived. The pair of them blank-faced, robotic even, they casually walked into Shambhala, incapacitating the guards and lingering assassins. The green-haired twin led the charge as if she knew where to go, with her brother close behind, a gun in his hand. Claude had heard them storm Thalas's office from the other room, heard Thalas's enraged roar. He heard murmured words and steely declarations. Claude heard the telltale sound of a shootout, the rapid lightning strikes of a bullet being fired, furniture and other objects crashing to the floor. A guttural scream echoed past the office walls, a body dropping with a heavy thud. Twin sets of footfalls resounded on the floor, one a pair of clicking heels, the other boots. Claude managed to catch the sight of them, the siblings covered in blood splatter. They noticed him fast, yet made no move to harm him. The sister studied him for a painfully long moment, faintly smiled, and walked off. The brother, strangely enough, grimaced and curled into himself like he was ashamed of something. With the Eisner twins in power, assassins dropped off the grid in droves. Claude's eyes went wide as he bolted upright, locking his gaze onto his phone. I have to talk to Sylvain. Claude rolled over to reach for his phone, hurriedly swiping at the device. He grabbed it and swiftly unlocked it with trembling fingers. He opened up a random group chat at International Super Spy, sent at 3:50. Hey Sylvain, I need to talk to you. International Super Spy. Change my name, it's stupid. I'm the bad guy, lol. What the fuck? I'm the bad guy, lol. It's fucking 3 in the morning. International Super Spy. I know, sorry. International Super Spy. I'm going to sound like such a child, but
I'm scared Dimitri will hate me. There's absolutely no way in the entire world he won't. No one's that forgiving.
International super spy.
I'm supposed to kill him. I should have killed him months ago. Sylvain, what do I do? What am I supposed to do?
International super spy.
I've got to tell him. I know I do, but...
I'm the bad guy. Lol. You're scared. International super spy.
Yeah, sorry for the spam.
I'm the bad guy. Lol.
It's fine, but you're starting to spiral. Be careful.
International super spy.
Haha.
I'm the bad guy. Lol. Ignoring that. I was in the same position, obviously. I'm the bad guy. Lol. I was assigned a hit. Felix Hugo Feldarius. Just like how the twins snagged you, Dimitri. I already knew what I was going to do. Toy with him. Treat him like some object. Fuck him and finally pull the trigger. I've done it before. That was my entire method. Using someone. Being used.
So it wouldn't have been an issue. Yeah?
International super spy. Yeah. I'm the bad guy. Lol.
So I met the guy. Struck up a nice conversation with a pickup line, and my hit gives me the most unpressed, angry glare I've ever seen in my whole life. It wasn't an embarrassed, angry look either. He just scoffed, arms crossed, and told me to drop the creepy look in your eyes if you're going to talk me up.
I'm the bad guy. But the strange part at the time, he just kept looking at me, like stealing glances, looking away, like he knew who I was.
It set me off because I thought, oh shit, he already knows I'm going to kill him. And then he asks, where have you been?
I'm the bad guy. Lol.
Though, thought he sounded like a dick, honestly. He sounded so demanding and curt and pretty much pissed me off. I told him a half-truth, basically that I've been sleeping around and I've never seen such a horrified look on someone's face.
I'm the bad guy.
Actually, no, that's a lie. Saw it all the time when my hit realizes they were about to die. But Felix just looked scared out of his mind. He just stood there in the middle of the MMA gym for a good minute. He only said my name, which no one else really knew at the time, back at the job. He sounded so fucking heartbroken. Covered it up with the glare while I forced myself not to go cold turkey on him. I honestly thought he sniffed me out.
I'm the bad guy. Lol.
I asked how he knew me, and he just looked destroyed. He tried so hard to mask it, but he's really open with his expressions. Felix gave me something to work with, and I ignored how sad he looked when he said we were childhood friends.
I'm the bad guy.
I didn't know that, actually.
International super spy.
I mean, it's been a real long time since we've seen him, yeah?
I'm the bad guy.
Lol, real long. Anyways, realistically, yeah, he was 21, 22 when I met him again, so yeah, it would make some sense if I'd forgot all about him by then.
I'm the bad guy. ... I'm the bad guy.
Well, you know, the job picks up kids with nothing. Kids that people won't miss, or any kid with potential.
International super spy.
Yep, I was one of those kids, lol. Being homeless for a few months. Not great.
I'm the bad guy.
Shit, you never told me that. That's terrible, kid.
International super spy.
I'm 23.
I'm the bad guy.
I'm older than you.
I'm the bad guy.
Back to the topic, though. I was not one of those kids. I did have money. Had friends who cared about me. No idea about the potential. And at 16, I was dragged into the job. Into Shambhala.
I'm the bad guy.
I don't remember much about my childhood or anything before Shambhala. All I was given was a number. I was told to practice shooting. Told to kill. And I learned.
I'm the bad guy.
They made sure I'd never leave. Never worry for my friends. Never even think of home.
International super spy.
Sylvain. International super spy. Sylvain, what did they do?
International super spy.
Sylvain, what the fuck?
I'm the bad guy.
Shock therapy. While the capital was busy burning, my fair policeman knocked me out, and the next thing I knew, I woke up at a place that definitely wasn't my father's house. I vaguely remember yelling or probably crying about something, maybe my friends, and I was drugged.
I'm the bad guy.
They erased it. My memories of Fargus, of my best friends. Parts of my home life weren't whipped away. I guess the trauma was too ingrained for Cornelia to do anything. Or she wanted to control the narrative that I ran away, or wanted to kill my father. I don't know. International super spy. Holy shit, what? International super spy. Fuck, I'm the bad guy. So, yeah, they had all the jurisdiction to mold me into their perfect murderer. I had no attachments, no reason to get out, so they had me play dress-up and cross-dress. Had me fucked like a toy by my hits because you like to flirt, little Gautier. Lied to myself that I wanted to take back control. So I did the same thing to my hits. I just wanted to self-destruct. No one would really stop me, so I'm the bad guy. Kept letting my hits use me. Worst mission I ever had. Well, it was this human sex trafficker. I was sent out alone to deal with him. I had to play my part. Look naive, an easy target. I was approached by a friend of my hit. Took my chance and got myself kidnapped. I'm the bad guy. I was blindfolded with my wrists tied and ushered into a room. The friend tore off my blindfold when people spilled into the room. My target was there too. I'm the bad guy. You get the idea. International super spy. Fuck. I'm the bad guy, lol. Lol indeed. I'm the bad guy, lol. Kind of explains my lack of understanding consent, according to Felix. International super spy. Why was that in quotes? International super spy. Sylvain. I'm the bad guy, lol. LMAO. Back to the love of my life, Felix. I'm the bad guy, lol. I actually thought I could mess around with him, gain a bit of his trust, and follow through with my plan. He made it incredibly difficult, not budging an inch for a while. It took longer for him to trust me than my other hits. He was very snappy, closed off and direct, but also observant. Felix saw right through me from the get-go, seeing ruin a lot quicker than most. I'm the bad guy, lol. He called me out on it, demanding to know why my eyes looked dead. Why did I keep smiling like that? That he hated how fake I became with him. That he hated how fake I became, even with him. I didn't have the context for it before, so I never put it together. But Felix always looked so sad, desperate, worried for me. I just thought he was being a hard ass. He would choose to avoid me, steer clear from his usual hangouts, just so I wouldn't find him. I'm the bad guy, lol. He didn't know what I was, but he was just hurt. We were really, really close when he was younger. After nearly a week, he got his bearings back and confronted me. And by confront, I mean casual conversation. This guy is somehow the most and least intense person I've ever met in my life. Remet? I'm the bad guy, lol. We started over, and bit by bit, I actually began to like him. Pieces of my memory resurfaced, but they were always short, almost meaningless. I had zero ideas on how to handle something like this, so I offered self-destruction, tried to get Felix to hate me, brought up touchy subjects like Dimitri's avoided him, but I couldn't actually. I'm the bad guy, lol. I couldn't use him. I think at the time, I actually believed he brainwashed me, but in reality, it was my subconscious reminding me that Glenn had me promise to protect Felix after he did something really dangerous. International super spy. What did he even do? Jump off a cliff? I'm the bad guy, lol. Close. He apparently defended me from my brother. Memory's still shaky, but Felix filled in for me. An idiotic 10-year-old Felix decided he didn't want Brother Dearest to hurt me anymore. He played hero and took the hits for me. Kept getting up every time Miklon brought him down. International super spy. Not surprised, honestly. He's got guts. I'm the bad guy, lol. I think he's always been that way. I mean, I wouldn't really know. But there's a part of me that still goes, he's so much braver than I am. Anyways, I ended up... I'm the bad guy, lol. I told him the truth. Told him I was ordered to kill him. Felix didn't take the news well, or at all. He looked at me like he wanted to punch me, and I wanted that, I guess. Punishment meant feeling alive at the time. Dumb, I know. But he just teared up and stormed off. It was strange. It felt like deja vu, seeing Felix cry. I'm the bad guy, lol. Then I got chewed out by Glenn. A week blurred by, and Felix reluctantly spoke to me.
International super spy.
And you patched things up?
I'm the bad guy, lol.
I have never seen you sound so panicked. It's hilarious.
International super spy.
I will actually shoot you.
I'm the bad guy, lol.
I'll slit your throat first.
I'm the bad guy, lol.
But yeah, things managed to work out. I told him everything.
I'm the bad guy, lol.
I love him. I really do. It's embarrassing, but every time I realize he still loves me, I end up crying.
International super spy.
Am I going to feel like that? I really don't want to.
I'm the bad guy, lol.
Mercy says there's nothing shameful about crying, and I'm not the, best person for advice. But honestly, bite the bullet in any way you can, and be whoever you were before Shambhala remade you.
International super spy.
Thanks. Mind answering another question?
I'm the bad guy, lol.
Yeah?
International super spy. Do you think the Eisner's final mission is just a ploy to free us?
I legitimately thought you died.
I'm the bad guy, lol.
I lived, bastard. I don't think it's a ploy. I think they actually want to free every last one of us. Not like anyone can stop them. Dallas and the rest of those monsters are dead.
I'm the bad guy.
Go and get some sleep, Claude.
Claude stared at himself through his bathroom mirror. The bright white light shone down on him, highlighting the shadows hounding his eyes. He tried to regain that frigid, faux-friendly composure, blankly smiling in the mirror. It didn't work. His mask was long taken off by gentle gloved hands, and his nerves shot through the roof. Failnaught stood before the mirror, dressed in a crisp black suit, his hands framed in brown leather gloves, like it would hide the blood on his skin. It'll be so easy. Failnaught looked sloppy, even with his suit, the loose yellow tie around his neck. His hair was unkempt, his curls flying every which way on his head. I've been to my Dimitri's house enough to know the layout. The gun resting atop the shining white sink failed to give him any comfort. Even as he moved to hold it, the familiar grip only made Claude's hand tremble. A chill swamped him, and he dropped the gun as if it burned him. This isn't new to me. It's just a mission. Just another hit. The suit really served as a finality. The backpack hanging over his shoulders felt like a heavy weight, even though all he had was a change of clothes, a bottle of bleach, rags, and backup weaponry. Failnaught knew this song and dance, knew how to perfect his smile into something friendly, knew how to get close to his target, butter them up and weasel his way into their lives, knew how to cleanly execute his Claude bit into his glove, turning away from the mirror so he didn't have to see the tears running down his face. He thickly swallowed and grit his teeth into the fabric. He had to kill his target. He had to. So Failnaught would. Claude sighed, setting his lips into a paper-thin smile, his red-rimmed eyes shifting to eerie despondence. He briefly slipped off his gloves and set them aside. Claude twisted the knob of his sink, blankly staring at the clear water rushing out the faucet. Leaning over, he cupped his hands under the faucet, splashing the ice-cold water on his face. Claude dried his hands, pulling his gloves back on with a grimace and sliding his gun into a backpack. Claude could do this. If he ignored his shaking, shattering heart, Failnaught could do this. Claude stepped out of the bathroom, mechanically walking towards his front door. He grit his teeth, turning the locks and leaving his apartment. Claude trudged through the halls, finding the staircase. With each step, his heart felt tightly lodged in his chest. The sound of his heart beat frantic and louder than it's ever been. When he slipped out the lobby doors, he could practically feel the blood splattering on his hands, the lone dull blue eye and a frozen pale face flashing in his mind. The night sky was foggy, covered in thick, dark clouds. They slowly rumbled by, light rain spilling from above and glossing over in quiet sheets. A sparse mound of lamp-posts lit up the sidewalks. Claude's silhouette crawled by his feet as he walked under the bright lights. He jolted, his fingers twitching and eyes skittering to his shadow. Claude blinked, shaking his head and breaking out into a speed walk. All too soon, he arrived at Dimitri's building. Claude stared into the glass of the front door, faintly aware that more droplets spilled onto his suit the longer he stood. With his head hung low, he pushed open the left door and pressed a random apartment buzzer. After a couple of grating, anxious murmurs, the buzzer gave off a shrill noise. Claude opened the lobby door, heading inside and waiting by the elevators. His feet felt heavy in his boots, and the discomfort itching at his skin festered once the elevator door slid open with a ding. He walked in, turning on his heel to jab the 7th floor button. The elevator smoothly ascended,
stopping at no other floors. Claude's heart, in contrast, wildly beat in his chest. He set his arms by his sides, balling his hands into tight fists. Claude slipped his hand into his pants pocket, gloved fingers catching onto slim pieces of metal. He fished out his silver lockpick, walking out of the elevator at the sound of a chime. His boots hardly made a sound as he went down the hallway, the comfort of his silent footfalls shifting into twisting anxiety with every step. Claude's stomach violently churned at the sight of Dimitri's door. His hands trembled around his lockpick, the tool bouncing off the doorknob with a soft clang. He clenched his teeth, one side biting down hard enough to hurt. Claude inhaled deeply through his nose, his eyebrows pinching down. With a tight frown etched onto his face, Claude got to work, jamming the set into the keyhole and slowly turning the lockpick. The lock eventually clicked, Claude hearing the lock loudly shift from the other side of the door. His hand settled on the aged golden doorknob, gripping it tight. He gently opened the door, slinking into Dimitri's apartment. The bright light shining from the bathroom spilled against the shadowy hallway building up to Dimitri's room. Claude closed the door, trying to take even, measured steps towards Dimitri's bedroom. His shadow caught on the wall, the light silhouette growing in size as Claude walked past the bedroom. He pointedly ignored the small picture frames lining the walls, smiling friends and dead loved ones making him uneasy. He felt eyes beating down onto him, each person in those photos judging him, picking him apart, watching him. Claude didn't hurry his pace, making sure he kept his footsteps as quiet as falling snow. Claude briefly stood in front of Dimitri's bedroom, the door slightly ajar, the light of the TV washing over the room in different colors. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his free hand digging for his handgun. Claude pressed his hand against the white door, pushing it aside and entering Dimitri's room. There his target was, bathed in flickering TV lights, swallowed up by his blanket as he slept. Dimitri kept his eyes tightly shut, his eyebrows furrowing, his lip curled in distress. He was curled on his side, his pale golden hair spilling onto his pillow. Killing him now would have been so easy. All it would take was one bullet to the head, to the heart, and Dimitri would die in his sleep. Just one click of the trigger. Claude belatedly noticed his lungs crying out for air, his heartbeat slowing. Claude's heart rate steadily increased as he approached the side of Dimitri's bed. His hands were still shaking, feeling clammy under his gloves. He raised his gun, the weight of the weapon seeming heavier than it ever was. Claude pressed the gun to Dimitri's forehead, rapidly blinking. He held down a strangled noise, realizing hot tears lined his eyes and spilled over. It would be so easy. It was easy. Failnaught took down his hits without batting an eye, smirking down at them as they bled out. He wiped his hands with each death like it didn't matter. Complete the mission. Just complete the... Claude's heart stopped, dead at the image staring in his mind, a desert lingering in his mouth. A bang echoed in his head, crimson bursting onto Dimitri's pillow, dyeing it red. Droplets of blood caught on his headboard, engulfing the other side of his bed like misshapen wings. Blood oozing down his forehead, his body jolting and slumping over. A hole resided in Dimitri's head, flesh exposed around the wound like a ring. His bangs clumped together with blood. Smoke flowed from the barrel of the gun, a bullet casing dropping between the bed frame. Claude choked on his own sharp breath, frozen in place. He blinked the image away, but it stayed, carved into his brain like a brand. Claude tried to swallow around the lump in his throat, his dark green eyes frantically looking Dimitri over, searching for any blood. The pillow was clean from any blood splatter. His bed was untouched. Dimitri's hair wasn't wet with blood. He was breathing. He's breathing. He's breathing. He's alive. That was just my imagination. He's fine. Claude couldn't do this. He couldn't. My fingers aren't even on the trigger. I can't kill him. I won't. Oh no. Dimitri's eyes snapped open, his pupil swallowing frozen, wild, icy depths. He panted for air, his frame shaking. The blonde let out a ragged breath, his fear eroding away. As he began to gradually wake up, his eyes steadily grew in realization. His lips curled into an ugly sneer, the usual warmth of his eye vanishing from sight. Dimitri gave a short, dark laugh, eye boring up at the gun. So you've come to kill. Dimitri's eyebrows twitched, recognition flooding his pale face. Khalid. A sob broke through Claude's mouth, arm trembling, the gun clinking against Dimitri's forehead. Dimitri's sneer morphed into a tight line, his eye virtually unreadable. His eye snapped to Claude's face, blankly staring at him. Claude's skin itched, so badly he wanted to run, to be anywhere but here. You, Dimitri whispered into the dark, his eye wide. Claude, explain this.
Claude flinched, opening his mouth. The words were trapped in his throat, and no sound left his lips. It was obvious. Dimitri hated him. There was no going back from this. Dimitri trusted him, and got a gun to his head. Claude didn't have the right to blubber like a child. He wasn't the one heartbroken and betrayed. He wasn't the one waiting for an assassin to kill him. They'll hate you. The look in Dimitri's eye was familiar. It was distant. Cold. Claude could see the flames rising under Dimitri's skin, ready to take over. He'd kill Claude eventually. If he breathed wrong, if he didn't answer. Strangers in Elmira stared at him like that, the hate in their eyes keeping them alive and sealing his fate. At least Dimitri despised him for a reason. No one will accept you. The one person that cared for him, that accepted Khalid, burned to ash the moment he pulled a gun. It was his fault. Claude shouldn't have accepted the Eisner's mission. He shouldn't have gotten close to him. Claude's chest felt funny, all the air in his lungs stuttering with each sharp, fractured gasp, his chest locking up and shaking, the walls warped, teetering with the shadows dancing against old dark blue paint. The gray carpet flooring was closer than it was seconds ago. He distantly heard a dull clatter beside him. Claude's vision blurred, and he slapped his gaze to the gun. His attention was stolen by a call, a name. It sounded urgent, angry almost. Angry like every other person sneering at him, screaming at him, hurting him. Why was it getting harder to breathe? Why was he shaking so much? He couldn't understand the violent ache in his head, the tears staining his reddened face. Claude stared up into a single blue eye, his vision watery. "Claude," Dimitri called, a deep frown still etched onto his pale face, and Claude tore his gaze away. "Answer me! Were you forced to kill me?" Claude jolted, curling into himself and shaking his head. It would have been his choice. He could have... Claude felt Dimitri's eye on him. It felt crushing. He covered his face in his hands, his gloved fingertips digging into his forehead. Claude hated it. He hated being watched, stared at like there was something wrong with him, like he shouldn't have existed in the first place, like he was a parasite. "Do you wish me dead?" A new, fresh wave of piping hot tears ran down Claude's face. The backs of his hands were pressed into his lap, muffling the horrid noises leaving his throat. A shaky breath tumbled from his mouth, his chest weighed down by bricks. He nudged his arms tight, his gloves crushing the sleeves of his suit. He didn't want Dimitri's smile to go out, for his eye to freeze over and dilate. Claude felt sick to his stomach. Bile rose in his throat, and he seethed, gritting his teeth hard. There was nothing he could do, not if Dimitri saw a monster. Then again, from the very start, Khalid was one. He was born a demon to hot-blooded parents, born in a country that didn't dare accept him. His eyes were an odd shade of green, the middle round too light and too dark, his skin too white to be considered Almiran. He was told he looked ghastly, that he belonged with the cowards of Fodland. He wanted to belong somewhere. Anywhere. Shambhala gave him a purpose. Even if Thalis lured him in like a rat with a treat, he had something to cling to hone. He embraced what others had told him, growing into the demon they had feared, despised. Claude eyed his gun through the corner of his eye. It was Failnaught's last mission. If Ruin was alive and well, that must have meant the others were. Claude could be the first person to truly fail this mission, the first toy soldier to break this far in. It wasn't like he had anything left. He was booted out of Shambhala in an effort to save him. He couldn't go back to Elmira. That place wasn't his home anymore, and he wasn't sure if one of his siblings ruled over the country. That place wasn't his home anymore, and he wasn't sure if one of his siblings ruled over the country. He'd be banned from stepping foot into the nation entirely. He could flee to Leicester territory, but there were a lot of people who were adverse to Almirans finding refuge in their country. It would be easy. So easy. No one would have to bother with accepting him anymore. No one would miss him. His gun was right there, within arm's reach. A deep, exhausted sigh tore Claude's thoughts away. He warily picked his head up. Dimitri now standing by the doorway, carefully watching him. His eyes still looked empty. The blonde messed with his hair, tightly gripping onto the locks and shutting his eye. Dimitri glowered down at him, swiftly turning his gaze away. "Come to the kitchen. I shall make some tea." The rain pitter-pattering against Dimitri's window grew heavier, hitting the glass like rapid-fire bullets. Claude opened his mouth, trying to find his voice. "Why?" Claude winced at how wrecked his voice sounded. I don't... Dimitri didn't trust him. So why? Why was he being so nice? Why hadn't he attacked him yet? Called his friends? The police? Dimitri looked back at him, his lips still set in a frown. He kept his eye on him, tilting his head some before deeply exhaling. You're in distress. Dimitri turned on his heel, stalking out of the room and keeping his clenched hands at his sides. Claude watched his back, heard his footsteps thunder against the creaking floorboards. He grabbed onto the edge of the bed, holding himself up on trembling legs. Claude abandoned his gun on the floor, wordlessly followed behind Dimitri. Dimitri's shoulders tensed at the lack of noise from Claude's footsteps. The blonde swiped a folded royal blue blanket from the couch, heading over to his kitchen and flipping the light switch. Lights burned in Claude's eyes, making him hide away and rapidly blink. Bright red and after images clung to his eyes as he closed them. Claude's eyes blearily opened at the sound of a cabinet being flung open. Dimitri reached for 2 mugs, one teal blue, the other a fiery orange. Another cabinet creaked open. Dimitri grabbed a small box of chamomile tea. He set the cups down with a dull clinking thud once the bottom hit the countertop. The cabinet slammed closed, and Dimitri scowled at the wooden door, offering a terse apology to Claude like he deserved one. He whirled around, facing his stove. His icy blue gaze caught on Claude for a breath. Then he snapped his focus back to the stove. Dimitri turned to the stovetop, watching the half-rusted tea kettle. Sit. Dimitri's request sounded more like a command in Claude's rattled mind, his voice shifting to a growl. Claude scrambled into his seat, the legs of the chair screeching against the floor. He kept his eyes locked onto the white placemat in front of him. Claude clasped his hands together tightly, resting them on the table. Back straight, breaths light, unmoving and silent as a marble statue. Obedient. He couldn't refuse an order. Failnaught knew what happened to little toy soldiers that tried. They were punished, broken in by cruel, ghastly hands, brainwashed by pretty lies, molded like clay into the shape they desired. The kids came out wobbling and tripping over their own feet, the defiant spark in their eyes turned to ash. It had happened to him. Claude still remembered the all-white, near-empty room, the smooth, polished flooring, the lifeless clean walls. He could still recall the distant scent of blood filling the room, being locked inside for what felt like days, the door seamlessly disappearing into the walls. And then Dallas would open that door, slink inside, his towering frame dripping with sinister confidence. He sat down before Claude, black ooze sliding off his deathly pale skin. The monster in human clothing shifted its form, short and wild, black hair curled in on now darkened skin, chocolate brown eyes boring into his, a rough sketch of Almiran silks and baggy pants covering his body. The Almiran boy, Thalas, had taunted him, called him weak, pitiful, told him his cursed blood made him a coward, and that he must prove his worth if he wished to keep breathing, told him Mommy and Daddy wouldn't come running for a runt, the words spat in harsh Almiran, convinced him Shambhala where he belonged, that if he listened to his master and worshipped his every word as truth, he'd be good. He would be allowed to leave the room, to eat, so as long as he promised to kill without question, without doubt, without guilt, because Lord Thalas said it would get him killed. It would make him an utter disappointment. Failnaught did not jolt when the bare hand lightly grasped his shoulder. He did not react to a blanket being draped across his shoulders. The assassin stayed perfectly still, staring down at a mug of steaming tea. Failnaught did turn his head at the sound of his name, the motion mechanic. The blood standing right by him took a step back, alarm flashing on his face. Claude! The man's eyes darted across Failnaught's body, failing to look him in the eye. Don't gaze upon me so. What happened? I don't understand. Failnaught tacked on a sir, just in case. The blonde nearly dropped his mug, his eyes bulging out of his skull. A soft panic, what? Escaped his lips. He glanced at the mug resting on the placemat. Drink the tea. The blonde made a terse noise when Failnaught held the mug almost immediately. Slowly, please. Be careful. Failnaught blinked, bringing the mug to his lips. Hot tea rushed into his mouth, honey mixed with chamomile hitting his tongue. It burned, pain flashing on his tongue and remaining there. His eyebrows quirked, knitting together. The walls weren't drove white and polished like gemstones. He wasn't sitting on cold, pure white marble floor. The man in front of him wasn't Thalas, only standing an inch taller, towering, expecting, manipulative. He was in a kitchen where he faintly remembered people crying for him, someone holding him, a kitchen where someone cooked for him, where someone trusted him enough to give away a secret. He blinked,
and reality crushed him to dust. I tried to kill him. He hates me. I almost killed him. He hates me. Sorry won't be enough. It'll be better if I... Claude, Dimitri called, looking far more worried for him than he should have been. Do not cry. You've already bawled your eyes out without deserving it. Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't... Claude's face scrunched up, his eyes shutting tight as his eyelashes clumped together with tears. I'm sorry, Claude said, as if a simple apology would solve anything. Dimitri's expression seemed to crumble, readying his next words, but halting when Claude beat him to the punch. I can go. Claude winced, realizing how bad that sounded. I'll leave, and you'll never have to see me again. Or you can call the police. It's... Claude, Dimitri called, his voice firm. No, you will not be leaving. Claude stilled. Oh, he's going to kill me. Is that why he served me tea? He has the strength to do it. He could snap my neck, slam my head into the table. Will you kill me? It'll solve the assassin problem, Claude replied, his joke as hollow as his voice. Dimitri froze, his face ashen. No, Claude, what? Dimitri tightly closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose, his strength immediately darkening the skin with a bruise. Listen to me. I do not want you leaving because there is a flash flood occurring right now. Claude dumbly blinked. What about the police? Dimitri's reply was curt and visibly cutthroat. A heated look danced in his eye, simmering anger appearing on his face. I do not trust them. Oh. Claude sipped more of his tea. We can speak of... Dimitri plainly gestured, sighing. This... tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning? Claude repeated, a question on his face. Why? I tried to kill you. Why are you letting me stay here? Dimitri leveled him with a flat look. I am exhausted. You are in no state to explain. There is a flash flood. Claude glanced down at the placemat, frowning. There isn't much to explain. I was hired to kill you, and tonight I followed through with my orders. You hesitated. Claude's eyes flicked back to Dimitri. He grit his teeth, seething. I know that. Look. Dimitri softly shook his head. Again, let us save this conversation for the morning. You look fairly tired as well. Didn't sleep. A frown etched into Dimitri's face, too sad and empathetic, all directed at his killer. I shall take the couch. No, you are not. Don't kick yourself out of your own room. Dimitri snorted. I assure you, it's... The humor in his voice died out, realization flooding his features, and noticing another invisible tell of Claude's. I see. Claude's eyes flew wide open. See what? Dimitri? The look in your eyes. A delicate frown was painted on Dimitri's face, a lone blue eye pinning Claude's in place. You are afraid of being left alone. Claude scoffed, rolling his eyes. I can tough it out. Dimitri hummed, pursing his lips. He seemed to think on what to say, how to convince him. Logically speaking, it would be safer for me if you slept in the same room. Dimitri immediately grimaced at his own words, shaking his head. And speaking as a concerned host, you have bags under your eyes, Claude. You looked stressed the moment I awoke and saw you standing over my bed. You... Dimitri sighed, drinking his tea in an effort to calm himself. You cried and collapsed onto the floor. Yeah, I was there. Dimitri paid no attention to Claude's comment, his crystal blue gaze just as intense as the violet rain smacking against the windows. Claude snapped his mouth shut. You looked haunted, shaken. So please, rest. Okay, Claude replied, tired and beaten down. Claude wanted to ask if Dimitri despised him. How could he stand to look at him and serve him tea? Claude wasn't that selfish to ask him, that dumb to poke the bear. Thanks for the tea, Claude said instead. Claude stood up from his chair, taking the blanket from his shoulders and holding it like a child would a stuffed toy. He walked back to Dimitri's bedroom, making sure his footsteps were loud enough. Claude stared at his gun for a long moment, forcing himself to pick up the weapon and drop it onto Dimitri's nightstand. He turned the safety back on, shucking off his boots, tie, and his suit. He was left in his short-sleeved undershirt. Claude quickly moved for his backpack, fishing out a hastily folded pair of black sweatpants and putting them on. He warily sighed, rolling over one side of the covers and sunk into Dimitri's bed. Claude's eyes fluttered close a few times, the warmth of Dimitri's blanket making him feel even more exhausted. The sound of creaking floorboards and dull thuds of a carpet grew more and more distant. Eventually, Claude fell asleep, clutching the edge of the pillow. Claude awoke to the sun stinging his eyes, natural light breathing into Dimitri's bedroom. Dimitri's side of the bed was already made, extra pillows set aside and away from Claude. His mouth was terribly dry, and Claude felt drool slipping past his lips. He made a face, wiping it off with the back of his hand. On the edge of the bed, Claude's clothes were neatly folded, coming equipped with a little blue post-it note. With a sigh and a hand running through his hair, Claude hopped off the bed, unfurling the sheets and putting the pillows in their proper place. He eyed the note with a wry smile. "Hello, there is an extra toothbrush in the bathroom. I shall be making breakfast soon. Take your time. D." Claude stretched with a yawn, rubbing at his eyes. He waddled out of Dimitri's room, heading for the bathroom, and turned the lights on. True to Dimitri's note, a lone green toothbrush sat in a plastic cup. Claude glanced at himself in the mirror, his lips a thin line as he watched himself grab the toothbrush. He looked better, almost, definitely well rested, feeling a middle ground of sleeping for a minute and an eternity. Sure, eye bags still hounded his eyes, and the anxiety from last night already started to roam back in his heart, but he looked all right. Claude distracted himself from the upcoming talk, brushing his teeth and splashing water on his face. He stared at the white tile flooring, mentally counting a row of them. Claude shook his head, walking out of the bathroom with confidence that Dee did not feel. He led himself to the kitchen, finding Dimitri sitting by the kitchen table and digging into a slightly burnt waffle. The blonde jolted, nearly choking on his food. "Claude, please make noise when you walk." Dimitri's eye winced as he swallowed, holding his fist to his lips. And your food is in the microwave." Claude sent Dimitri an apologetic look, rubbing the back of his head. "Sorry, thanks for the food." Claude walked past the table, blinking at the time displayed on the microwave. 2:46. He let me sleep that long? Why? Claude opened up the microwave, checking for any metal utensils. Finding none, he closed the door and punched in 1:30. He watched the golden lights turn on, the plate of food slowly rotating. Claude headed back to the table, sitting across Dimitri. "So," Claude awkwardly started, unable to even look at the blonde, "what would you like to know?" Dimitri hummed, taking another bite of his waffle. His fork scraped against the plate, making Claude wince a bit. "I merely need an explanation. That's all. And then I can leave? The flood looks over to me." Claude picked his eyes back up to Dimitri's face. The blonde scowled, bending the handle of his fork, and then frowned, sighing to himself and placing a hand over his forehead. "And go where, exactly?" Claude shrugged. He clasped his hands together, pressing a thumb to his skin. Claude tore his gaze away from Dimitri, staring at the table. "Like I said last night, I was assigned a mission to assassinate you, and I tried to kill you yesterday." At Dimitri's expectant, patient gaze, Claude continued. He swallowed. The Eisner twins gave me the mission with the expectation I should fail it." Strangely, the look in Dimitri's eyes shifted. He sat a little straighter, his eyebrows picking up, his crystal blue eye going wide. The blonde kept quiet, though, waiting for Claude to say more. "You're, the first person that survived an encounter with me. Usually I, complete the mission." "How long does it take you?" Claude forced down a wince. He dragged the word out, his lips twisting in discomfort. "Depending on the target, 3 weeks would be the earliest. The latest would be a month or 2. I, befriend them, kill them after a while." Is he going to ask why I haven't killed him? Why did I wait this long? Was our friendship, our relationship a lie? I hope he doesn't. I really... Dimitri's brows quirked down, a storm settling in his eye. It made Claude nervous, his hands beginning to feel a little jittery, his heart rate picking up. "And what would happen if you refused?" Claude reared back, his brain stalling. "What do you mean?" Dimitri scrunched up his face, his eyebrows furrowing down at the bridge of his nose. His nose wrinkled, and his lips were set in a particularly hard line. "If you refused," Dimitri slowly repeated, briefly scowling at his food. "What would happen to you? You acted strangely last night after I told you to sit down. You had gone quiet. You did not even move when you looked at me." Dimitri shuddered, looking a little disturbed. What happened? Oh, that. Sorry. That? Dimitri echoed, alarm crawling all over his face. Claude bleakly laughed. Funny story. I actually didn't want to kill anyone, since, murdering a lady is pretty traumatic for a kid. Plus, everyone back home gave me tough time over it. You should have died, this, and you're a monster, that. He blew out a sigh, rubbing at his temples. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have a choice. When I got my first mission, I refused. I couldn't stomach killing another person. I didn't want to imagine it. My boss decided otherwise and locked me in a room. Claude glanced away, biting the inside of his cheek. He left me there, all by myself. He'd check in with me, really just making sure I wasn't dead. I guess he would just go on, telling me I could leave if I followed orders, that any guilt I felt would lead to my death. Claude scoffed. I was stupid enough to believe that crusty old bastard. Horror slapped across Dimitri's face, giving way to a dark, red, hot fury. He what? Dimitri snarled, the handle of his fork shattering in one go. He manipulated you. His voice took on a low pitch, a growl snapping in his words as he grit his teeth together. Sickening. He conditioned you into... Yeah, Claude dragged the word, making a face, not having a single clue how to react. Bossman may have done that to me often, at least early on, so I got better when he stopped hounding me. He was not hounding you, Claude! Dimitri snapped his mouth shut, rubbing his temples. His skin was immediately bloomed red with a bruise. The blonde let out a ragged sigh, counting to 15 under his breath. So, I guess I was so... Claude's lip curled. On edge yesterday that my brain slipped up. Thought I was in the room again, so... He casually waved his hand around. I worked on autopilot. The whole yes sir, no sir obedience. Dimitri looked like he was ready to throw up. With his fork destroyed, he couldn't eat, though judging by his expression, Dimitri hardly wanted to. He sat in his chair, not even breathing. Claude, it's fine. I didn't die, so I turned out perfect. Dimitri was the perfect definition of pure disbelief. His eyebrows were raised high, disappearing into his bangs. His muddied blue eyes popped right open, light flickering in. Claude! Dimitri leaned forward, a sad little look creeping on his face. That is an incredibly low bar, I'm afraid. Being used and taught to murder? That is... and considered surviving as turning out perfect? Claude... How? Dimitri clenched his teeth, breathing deeply through his nose. How old were you? Claude's eyebrows twitched, a frown etching onto his face. Why does that matter? Dimitri jolted. He pursed his lips like he bit into an unpeeled orange, his eyes darting every which way. Claude stared at him, unblinking. He tilted his head slightly, raising an eyebrow. Why does it matter, Dimitri? Dimitri shrunk back in his seat, hiking up his shoulders. He fixed his gaze onto the table and filled it with the remains of his fork. It is just... Dimitri practically radiated nervous energy. I'm sorry. I put a gun to your head yesterday. Why are you apologizing to me? Dimitri opened his mouth, closed it, and attempted to speak. Sylvain told us what happened that night, when he vanished. A chill swept Claude's spine, and Dimitri took to glancing at the window, pained. As FE3H was attacked, he was kidnapped and claimed by Shambhala. He was only 16. 16 and forced to kill at their beck and call. Dimitri breathed out a shaky sigh. He was missing for 8 years. 8. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he returned, remembering little about us. Claude froze. He stopped breathing, watching Dimitri as the blonde turned his way. You knew? Claude said, his voice barely a whisper. You knew. Why didn't you have Sylvain take care of me? Or just... I did not know from the start, Dimitri replied, as if that cleared up anything. While I was put off when I first met you, it was a little easier after I invited you into my home, where I began to suspect some things. You were similar to Sylvain. Much too similar. Dimitri grimaced. Your eyes were blank, as though they belonged to a corpse. You didn't seem to care too much about the world around you. And I initially believed you were just a product of the hardship you endured. I based that off assumptions and wrongly aligned Dedue's plight with the information you gave me. Apologies. So you figured I was like Sylvain, and didn't do anything about it? Claude flatly said, disbelieving. Dimitri smiled a little, not chastised in the slightest. I did not. Perhaps my judgment was skewed. But after you smiled at me, truly smiled, I decided not to say a word. You bet your life on a smile? Dimitri, I could have killed you! Yet you did not. Dimitri leveled Claude with that lone icy eye, nothing more than an intense snowstorm screaming in a thick ring of blue. At 14, I looked up at the man who shot Glenn. The others that put innocents to slaughter, that coldness, the rage in their eyes reflected in the flames. Dimitri kept his eye on Claude, his lips in a paper-thin line. At 17, I looked into the eyes of a madwoman, Cornelia, who did not care that I had lived through my torture. Her eyes were hardly human. They had looked snake-like. The blonde drew in a deep breath. I did not see that in your eyes, the detachment Sylvain spoke of. The blank look in your eyes was no longer there. You did not have the eyes of a killer yesterday night. You stopped having that look in your eye months ago, Claude. Claude sat in his chair, frozen and open-mouthed in shock. You've got to be less trusting. I don't understand. Did you take the news oh so well when Sylvain told you the same thing? Dimitri went through the 5 stages of grief in a record-breaking 3 seconds. No, Dimitri timidly answered. Not at first. I was, still unwell at the time. I was furious with him, and despite me, Byleth. Dimitri quirked his brow in confusion, saying the name in a questioning tone. I was furious with him, and despite, Byleth? Dimitri quirked his brow in confusion, saying the name in a questioning tone, informing me Duskar was someone else's doing. I accused Sylvain of the tragedy. Dimitri put his face in his hands, groaning. I had to walk out before my temper became any worse. I knew I wasn't quite making sense, and the accusation was blatantly false. I came back. I wanted to understand, so I merely stayed quiet. Dimitri scratched at his cheek. I was rather angry, however, believing Sylvain to have been a long-lost friend, only for him to be an assassin lying in wait. Thinking of Felix losing his life, it pained me. Dimitri hummed, his expression turning wistful. Though, with how distraught Sylvain looked, I believe he wouldn't have harmed Felix. I suppose to him I did not look forgiving enough, so he actually went on his knees and bowed. He swore to us, Glenn, Ingrid, and I. He promised that he loved Felix too much to even think of killing him, that he would beg forgiveness every day if it meant we believed him. Felix looked incredibly embarrassed by his declaration, sadly, so we started yelling at him. Sylvain later informed the rest of the group, and it went surprisingly well. So you just forgave him? Why? Dimitri, why are you like this? Dimitri huffed, giving Claude a light glare. Would you have preferred I crushed his skull? Demean him? I chose to believe him, because the man has never gone back on a promise, memory loss or not. I believed him because it was clear the love he held for Felix overrode the shell he used to be. And if I am being truthful, Dimitri sighed, frowning, I have no grounds to judge him, not when I was a monster myself. How are you real? Dimitri's cheeks pinkened a bit. So I could tell you my entire life story, apologize and say I love you, and you'd sweep an attempted murder under the rug? I could. Dimitri failed to stifle a laugh at whatever face Claude was making. As foolish a choice as it is, I will. I know you have the capability to injure me, or even kill me, if you so wished. But, Dimitri looked Claude directly in the eye, but you are unwilling to do so. Dimitri faintly smiled, the corners of his lips twitching as if he were a little unsure. The look that Glenn saw in your eyes, that I can see? His smile grew less unsure. It turned into something painfully warm and gooey. It was love. It was love? I know what I saw in your eyes, so I think you'll make the right choice. You looked a little lonely. He's scared. They both are. I don't get you. Why would you bother? Why the hell would... I don't get you. Why would you bother? Why the hell would... Claude sobbed, covering his eyes with his arm. Why would you still love me after all this? Accept me after... Dimitri stood from his chair, weaving over to Claude and practically looming over him. Claude was about to say something, even if the lump started to build in his throat. He jolted at the arm slowly wrapping around him. I do not believe I need a reason to love you, Khalid. I simply do, and that is enough for me. Claude huffed out a wet laugh. You're crazy. You know that? Dimitri snorted. Felix has been telling me as such for months, so I am well aware. Claude broke out of his hug to get up. He smiled, bumping his head into Dimitri's shoulder. I guess I'm just as bad. Claude drew away, brushing a hand against the table. So why don't we start over? Hey, I'm Khalid. It's been about a week since I moved here, and I think I'm still lost. Dimitri hid his grin behind his hand, a laugh bubbling from his throat. He held out a hand for Claude to shake, the delight in his eye burning bright. Oh, it's wonderful to meet you. I suppose I can show you around sometime. Ooh, right out the gate, huh? I don't even know your name, big guy. Dimitri laughed, his cheeks flaring, eyes crinkling. He pulled Claude into a hug once more. I think you do, Dimitri challenged, his voice muffled from Claude's shirt. And you're waiting. For? Dimitri pressed a small smile into Claude's hair. He toyed with a strand, his fingers ever so careful. A blush heated Claude's skin, and his heart seemed to stutter in his chest. He was embarrassed to even think it, but Claude felt like a Disney princess, with how he was embraced by a not-so-perfect prince, how delicately said prince was touching his hair, keeping that strength of his at bay. To fall in love with me. Claude immediately turned scarlet. He shoved his head into Dimitri's chest, trying desperately to hide away. Dimitri! Gods, I hate you! Claude actually whined, his voice pitching way higher than he thought it could go. Dimitri merely laughed at Claude's suffering, the sound clear as a bell and rich in quality. Come now, the food must be terribly cold. Dimitri reluctantly pulled away from the hug, walking over to the microwave and staring at Claude with a particularly nervous look. You have the next 23 hours before my friends tear into the both of us. You know what? I'll pretend I didn't hear that. You mind watching Lilo and Stitch with me again? Claude glanced away, a hint of a blush heating his face. I really like that one. Of course, my beloved.